For the memories of a lifetime, recall, recall, recall. Yeah. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Critically Acclaimed, the podcast where highbrow and lowbrow collide!
We need a big explosion sound effect.
I'm going to work on getting us... I'm making a note of it. I'm getting us an explosion sound effect.
Write down a note.
Explosion sound effect.
What we need to do is blow something up and record it, and then put it on there. There are too many stock explosions. We need our own.
Yeah, that's how they made the sound effects in like Star Wars and stuff. They found a real lightsaber.
That's right.
Cool. Hey, everybody, my name is William Bibbiani. I'm a film critic for the internet. Everybody calls me Bibbs.
My name is Witney Seibold. I, too, am a film critic for the internet.
Ooh.
And I write articles about Star Trek Discovery and about how vaguely disappointing it is for IGN. Catching a lot of flack for that.
How dare you have opinions about
I know,
things.
Seriously.
Let's enjoy this podcast about our opinions.
Yes.
So,
where we dare.
This week on Critically Acclaimed, it's actually a pretty light week for new releases. We've only seen one new film. I watched a bunch of old films. I saw Geostorm finally.
What'd you think of Geostorm?
Geostorm is very entertainingly silly,
isn't it? It's dumb as it's just as dumb as you've heard.
Yeah, it's dumb, but it's
so
dumb as its construct. Like I can't be mad at it. Like I would never put it on a worst of the year list. Also, I want to say something right now. Abby Cornish is great in that movie.
Yeah,
she's really funny in that movie.
Abby Cornish is great in many things.
She is. She's one of these actors who has always been like on the cusp of being in. Like she starred in that Madonna movie about Wallace Simpson, W.E. and
right.
like as the framing device though, so no one really paid attention. It was a damn shame. Like she's always been like really, really great, and she gives this performance as this. Okay, so if you haven't seen Geostorm, that's most of you.
Nobody saw Geostorm. It was
Geostorm
a big bomb.
Geostorm is about in the near future. Global warming. Basically, the day after tomorrow happened, but all of humanity.
But it's the future. And there's
it's 2019,
and there's a global shield protecting us from bad weather.
Yeah, basically, the day after tomorrow happened, the weather started destroying the planet, and every country in the world, led by America, gets together to join forces with science to save the planet using a network of satellites that manages to manipulate weather. So whenever there was like a hurricane, they stop the hurricane from happening with science.
Like they're literally like type it in like stop hurricane, and that works.
And but then some evil bastard, who knows who it is, has hacked the weather system and is going to create a geostorm that destroys the planet.
A geostorm, which is essentially a storm everywhere. Like the entire surface of the planet will be covered with storm.
Yeah, an entire surface of the planet is a hurricane, basically, is what it would be. It would be the most catastrophic thing ever. And
I'd love to see, like, a guy who's like swept up in the geostorm and the winds blow him in such a way that he just sort of rides the jet stream and just like ends up in Paris just because he flew there and he's totally okay.
That would be fun. But in any case, it's one of those. It's directed by Dean Devlin, who worked on all of like the Roland Emmerich films that are exactly like this.
He produced all. This is his first directorial effort, but he produced all of the Emmerich films
and wrote a lot of them as well. So it has that same vibe. It's a big ensemble, international cast, and
led by Gerard Butler.
As an American
man, Gerard Butler.
With his American brother, Jim Sturgis. And the American Abby Cornish as a Secret Service agent who is having
Scots, British, and Aussie.
And she's
British.
She's sleeping with like the secretary of Geostorm, played by Jim Sturgis, and she's not supposed to. She plays the entire part like a Terminator who only recently found out what the human emotion love is about. She is so
she's really cold and steely.
She's so cold and steely, but she is absolutely committed to their love. She is intentionally so. Hilarious. It's a really great performance, and I want to see her in more action stuff. She is cool in it. She's great.
She was in Sucker Punch, wasn't she? I think she was in Sucker Punch. So she's done some action. I
want her to be in good action.
Yeah, something that's not as horrible as Sucker Punch.
Was she really in Sucker Punch?
Yeah.
Am I that out of touch?
She was the fifth one, I guess.
She was Sweet Pea in Sucker Punch.
Sweet Pea, that's right. Oh, golly, they all have those really terrible names.
Oh, I know.
We could go on about how terrible Sucker Punch
But
is.
it wasn't the bad film that won the poll. We're going to be talking about that one and pairing it up with an all-time classic later in the episode. But for now, let's talk about the movie you and I both saw, Winchester.
Winchester Cathedral. Winchester is a ghost story.
Ooh.
About, and it's based on a true story, because they all are these days.
Well, but there are a lot of,
there's
quote-unquote true stories about ghosts.
It's about a real person.
There's plenty of actual supernatural stories to build from.
Yeah.
So that's how weird that's
this is about Lady Winchester, who is played by Helen Mirren. She is the heir to the Winchester rifle fortune, and she has reached a point in her life where she realizes that the product that her family has provided has been responsible for a lot of death. And in order to atone, she has decided to move into a mansion and keep it under construction 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And nobody knows why. That's a little nutty. And so Jason Clarke plays a laudanum-addicted therapist who is hired in by the potential heirs to her estate, to the business, because if she's crazy, they inherit it.
To go to the crazy place and find out how crazy she is. And it's the same setup for The Cure for Wellness, isn't it?
It's the same setup for a lot of movies, a lot of Hammer movies, and both The Cure for Wellness and this are really, really trying to mine Hammer and doing it badly, because nobody can do Hammer except for maybe Tim Burton and Sleepy Hollow. That's like the one instance I can think of where a Hammer homage has kind of worked out. I didn't see. What was it? The Love Witch? I didn't see that.
I heard that was good. I didn't see that one either.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people try because it takes a lot of production design. It takes a lot of money to do it right now.
A lot of people really like...
It's not like the 60s where they all had it in a closet and they could just
they could just go to the BBC props cabinet.
They can just go to your neighbor's castle and shoot it. Like, now it takes a lot of effort to make a Hammer movie.
Yeah, Guillermo del Toro made Crimson Peak. I do not like Crimson Peak.
There's a lot I like in Crimson Peak, so for me it's a net win. Okay. I think there's really good performances. The production design is, of course, astounding.
It's astounding. It's in service of kind of a predictable and not very interesting story.
It's basically Rebecca with a Hammer twist.
Mia Wasikowska needs to do roles other than things like that, because she's capable of... If she plays modern roles, she's actually really energetic and fun, but she's always asked to play like the dress-wearing... kind of period damsel. She was in Jane Eyre. It's like, no. Get Abby Cornish in Jane Eyre.
I didn't think it was particularly good Jane Eyre. But
she was in Abby Cornish. She was in Bright Star.
But Jessica Chastain and Tom Hiddleston are fantastic in Crimson Peak. I think they're so good.
Guillermo del Toro set up the scenery and they shoot it down.
I digress, but yeah, the Winchester. So the Winchester Mystery House is a real place. You can go to it. It's in San Jose, California, and it's a big tourist trap now. It's just this weird place with a whole bunch of odd architecture. There's stairs that just lead up to the ceiling. They don't go anywhere. There's houses. There's like doors that are upside down. There's all kinds of weird shit in there. And
she built this organically. She didn't build it as a tourist trap.
Yeah, she built this for whatever her reasons were. And the story goes that it was under literally 24-hour a day, constant construction throughout like the rest of her life, which is many, many years. Apparently that's not strictly true. And there were breaks taken, but mostly true. Like that, most of the time, that's actually what was going on.
In the world of Winchester the movie, he goes to this house to investigate why she's doing this, and he learns ghosts are kind of not making her do it.
And this is
they add a supernatural element to why she's doing what she's doing. If she were just doing this as a twisted form of penance, that would be a great psychological study, like trying to find order within the chaos.
But it turns out there's actually like this whole elaborate mythology. She's doing this, and here's, I think, one of the big flaws, and possibly the biggest flaw with Winchester, is that from the first scene, we know that there are real ghosts.
Yeah.
There's no, and I realize it feels like a storytelling cliche, like, are the ghosts real, aren't the ghosts real? But when you just immediately, you know that there are ghosts in the first scene, and then, like, in scene 5, the scene after Jason Clarke gets into the house, he just flat out sees a ghost. We know he's on laudanum, which is a hallucinogenic, but even so, we know that they're real, so we know he saw a real ghost. There's nowhere to build. So it's not a lot of like, oh, is she mad? Is she not mad? It's just kind of flat. There's no escalation.
There's plenty to build if all of the characters are in on the secret. If they all say, well, we know ghosts are real. We know that, like, look at the Insidious movies. Ghosts are real. We know this is how they operate. And here's how we're going to deal with it.
But the premise of the plot is Sarah Winchester insane or not?
Are ghosts real? And she behaves crazy, but we know she's not because there are ghosts. And we do learn why she's building all of these extra rooms in her house and what role the ghosts play in all of this. It's all presented so flatly and undynamically and uninterestingly. You are granted access to this wonderful house with all of this really weird architecture
and history.
At least have like one montage where you're sort of swirling through all of these weird hallways and sideways doors and all the rest.
It's a labyrinth. I interviewed the Spirig brothers who directed this, and unfortunately I had to interview them before I saw the movie, so I couldn't ask them anything too pointed. But I know it's frustrating.
Publicists do that to us sometimes.
I know. I try to avoid it whenever I can, but this time I wasn't able to. But I asked them just about shooting in the Winchester house. What's that like? And they said we had to recreate a huge chunk of it on the soundstage because the house itself is really hard to shoot in. Not just because it's confined spaces, which is true for any real house. You can't like knock out a door to get the right shot. You have to work with what you got. But because it's confusing and people would like wander off, take a wrong door and not be able to find the set again. That's interesting. What they have here is a haunted house in a labyrinth. It is a labyrinth, and it never feels like a labyrinth. People don't get lost. In fact, the majority of the film takes place in the same like 4 or 5 rooms, and that's kind of a waste of the location.
There's a stairwell, and there's
his room. There's the drawing room where he does a lot of interviewing with Helen Mirren. And how do you do a series of scenes with Jason Clarke, who's a really good actor, Helen Mirren, who is one of the all-time great actors, in which he is trying to convince her that she's insane, and her sounding insane convincing him that he doesn't understand reality. How do you make those scenes boring? This is the film. But yeah, it's very kind of straightforward, and that's really, really frustrating. The Spirig brothers are filmmakers who I'm generally quite a fan of, but I don't think they're right for all material. You may know them. They did the vampire movie Daybreakers, which is a clever film.
It's pretty bonkers.
Daybreakers, it kind of flew under a lot of radars, but I'm a big fan of this movie. Daybreakers is about, it's the near future. People found out that vampires were real. And rather than go off exterminating vampires, they found out, so you're immortal if you become a vampire? Everyone became a vampire by choice. Problem is, now they're running out of blood.
Well, that's
pretty clever.
They have human farms, but people are just dying. People are running dry.
And so there's this really funny bit where like everyone's just getting their blood in coffee.
Yeah,
like that's it. Starbucks is the only restaurant left because everyone only drinks liquid. There's like riots at the Starbucks to get the last blood coffee,
and that's how you get your ration. It's like war rationing. There's so many strange mythological things.
They really thought that one out in a very fun way.
And if you're a vampire for too long, you turn into like a monster vampire. But if you're exposed to sunlight for a little bit,
don't run. It's one of the cleverer takes on the vampire tale. It's not really scary, but it's not trying to be. It's just kind of a geeky idea of it. Like, let's take all these ideas to a logical extreme. They also did what I think is one of the better sci-fi films of the decade, Predestination.
Well, and in fact, the lead actress from Predestination, Sarah Snook,
who gives one of the best performances of the decade, if you ask me, in that movie.
Really, really good in that movie, and she's great here. She has a small role.
She has 2 small roles. She doesn't have enough to work with.
She doesn't have a lot to work with, but she's gonna mind that. She has that poor scene, like the poor exposition heavy scene where she takes the hero in and just explains everything to him.
Here are the rules of the house, blah.
She turns into like a mini Kathy Bates in that scene. It's like she's just bored by everything she says. She has no patience for him. She really puts meat on those bones. She is a really great actress.
Sarah Snook is serious. You would think. Usually when you talk about great actors, really young actors who haven't like found their big break yet, that they're just looking for the right role. Eventually they'll find the right role and everyone's like, oh my god, and then put them in big things. She did. It was called Predestination. No one saw it. She gives one of the most incredible performances I've seen maybe ever. Like, it's so good.
Various ages.
It's a time travel story, and it's completely bonkers, and it's really, really great. But then the Spirig brothers did Jigsaw, the latest Saw movie, which wasn't very good.
Well, it's just
just wasn't interesting. I don't think they're not when it comes to horror, I think they're interested in it, but I think they're intellectually interested in it. I don't think they're emotionally interested in it. They are not showmen. They're not like, ooh, look at the scary shit we got for you. No, it's just like, wouldn't it be interesting if ghosts worked like this? And I would say, it would be interesting, Spirit Brothers, but you have to try to scare me too, and they're not that good at that.
They're more interesting, like so many filmmakers, when they're dealing with limitations. Like Daybreakers was not an A production. No. I guess Winchester isn't either, but Winchester and Jigsaw have a little bit of studio backing behind them.
They have the money they need to do exactly what they need to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So when they have that much money, they cannot help but be efficient. And I think when they're working with limitations in something like Predestination, which has to be really kind of thought and character heavy, they're going to excel a little bit more because they have to rely on their ideas.
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
It's hard to say for certain, but that seems to be the pattern anyway.
I've seen it happen with so many filmmakers where they're given bigger budgets and they become way less interesting.
Joel Schumacher. Joel Schumacher is one of the great punchlines, and granted, he's made some bad low-budget movies, but his low-budget movies are very typically much better than his big-budget movies. Like, you'll watch something like, Lost Boys, which is a good movie, but it's a very modest movie. Then you give him Batman and Robin, and he's like, yeah. Give him Tigerland. Ooh, Tigerland. Tigerland's actually pretty good. And
something
then
like Falling Down, which I know a lot of people really love.
And these are all, say what you will, but they're better than the big budget stuff he gets.
The one I always go to is Sam Raimi. You go back, or Sam Raimi and Peter Jackson are kind of my examples, because
you're not a big fan of Lord of the Rings movies.
I'm not a big fan of Lord of the Rings movies. I think stuff like you watch Meet the Feebles or Dead Alive and Bad Taste, like his early horror stuff.
Yeah.
He's so much more lively and innovative than he is with something like Lord of the Rings, where he's just sort of filtering through a lot of fan art for something like Lord of the Rings.
And I think it's worth noting, I think people forget this, that principal production of Lord of the Rings, all 3.5 hour films, or whatever they were, was about $180 million. One of those movies would cost that. Nowadays, he was still crunching to try to get everything in there. So those are still difficult shoots where he was trying to be as economical as possible.
But when he made Meet the Feebles, however, he had to fool producers. He went to his money men. He's like, okay, I want to make this really crass puppet film where they all have sex and have venereal diseases and pee on each other. And they said, okay, fine, that's a good idea. Here's some money. So he started shooting Meet the Feebles, and he ran out of cash. It wasn't nearly enough. This little pittance they gave him wasn't enough to finish the film. He's like, well, he went back to the money people, said, hey, look, I need a little more money to finish my crass puppet movie. And they said, well, no, we're not going to do that. And he said, well, okay, that's fair. I used up the money you gave me. Hey, I have an idea for another film, however. It's this other, I don't know what it is. It's like this horror thing. Can I have some money for the horror film? They said, oh, sure, here's some money for the horror film. And he took it and he finished Meet the Feebles, and he never made the horror film. So he actually had to fool people and lie to get that film made. And the strange filthy desperation on screen in that movie is far more fascinating than anything you'll find in Lord of the Rings.
I want to clarify one thing about what I said about the Lord of the Rings. My exact number may have been wrong. I was talking about principal photography. When all was said and done, and they were successful, and they started throwing money at it, the trilogy ended up costing way more than that. But that was the original production was actually very economical. So yeah, Winchester.
Yeah, we're not talking about Winchester anymore because it's not interesting.
It's not terrible. It's certainly a watchable movie, but it's not very scary. It all kind of comes together too tidily to be scary.
And the big reveal is presented so flatly that it's like, wait, that's what you were getting. That was your surprise.
And I'll be honest, I didn't see it coming, but only because there was no showmanship.
And and here's the twist. They just tell you.
Yeah.
There's no build up to it. There's no indicating or foreboding or foreshadowing. It's just there's this twist, this big reveal, and they just sort of tell you, and it doesn't feel like anything really happened. That's how you feel at the end of the movie, that nothing really happened.
There's this weird thing. Towards at the end of the movie, because it's based on a true story, there's a couple title cards telling you what happened or what the thing was. And they mention this thing, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because it feels like a spoiler, even though I don't think it is. But they tie in this historical event that happened in 1906 when the movie takes place. And it's this was this in 1906, and I'm like, is that relevant? What did that?
Well, it happened in the movie.
When? It's not very clear.
It's not very clear.
They tie in
It did happen in the movie,
event to the movie, and I swear to God, if it wasn't in the title card, I wouldn't have known for certain that's what they were doing. It's such a weird thing.
They kept mentioning the year, so I knew what happened in that year, so I was kind of looking for it.
Yeah.
So when it happened, I was like, that can't be it. That can't possibly be the historical event that I'm thinking of, and it turns out it was.
It's not very well sold. It would be like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example here. Like, if you made a movie in Los Angeles about Los Angeles in like the early '90s, and he did the Northridge earthquake, but at no point in the film does anyone really talk about the earthquake, and that when the earthquake happened, it was at the same time in the movie as a really large truck drove by the house, and everyone just responded to that. Like, that's what it feels like. It's sort of like, what? Why did you bother? Anyway, Winchester, bit of a disappointment.
A bit of a disappointment, and there was an opportunity here because it's about, not just are you filming in this interesting spot, and you're filming about this interesting woman, there's messages of gun control in this movie. Yeah. Very much, because it is about sort of penance for the gun makers, and...
It's very topical.
It's incredibly topical, and there's a way to... look at that and look at America's history with gun violence and actually make a really interesting ghost story out of it and really kind of delve into the politics of it. This film is way too safe. It stays way the hell off. It turns it into something far too personal, not just personal, but really kind of soap operatic. Well, it becomes a little too angsty and small.
They don't confront it, and by the time we're seeing other ghosts, which, not a spoiler, there's a ghost, we told you already, and it's in the first scene, you won't be surprised. The vast majority, it's interesting because we're looking at the history of gun violence in America. That's the backdrop, really, of the supernatural horror. And there are only 2 ghosts that we see who aren't white. And boy, look at the cliches they decide to put in there. Yeah, is some maybe it would have been better if you hadn't addressed it at all. I don't know. It gets real heavy.
That might have been their comment, though, because you look back over like gun violence and gun ownership. It's a history of whiteness in America. A lot of people have brought that up, especially in like recent.
But this is about the victims of gun violence, not the owners necessarily.
Yeah,
there's overlap, but it's not specifically about people who own guns. It's about people who were killed by guns. And again, that's something that, the idea of someone feeling guilty about that is ripe for horror. Because a lot of horror is based on retribution for sin, for guilt and shame. And that's a great idea. That's a great setup. But man, this deserved better material than this. This is a very stock... very just kind of...
It's a February release is what it is.
Honestly, Insidious The Last Key was better, and that wasn't even very good. Like, that was just okay. That was just an okay matinee. Insidious The Last Key was, at least exciting to watch. Yeah. Tucker shows up in both movies. Angus Sampson.
Angus Sampson.
Fun character actor. Always nice to see him in something. So on the critically acclaimed scale of C- to C+, with C+ being... definitely recommend, C- being don't bother, C being there's a lot of wiggle room in all those, because C+ is the exact same thing I would give to like Transporter 2 and 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like, they're both just like, you should see those.
Clearly those films are equally good.
Yeah, that's what we're saying. That's exactly what that means.
Winchester, however, is a C-. Winchester is just a dull film that will not do it. You'll forget it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to need to remind myself at the end of the year that I saw this movie at the beginning of the year.
And it's a shame, because think about how few horror movies Helen Mirren has been in. You have Helen Mirren as a grieving widow building a haunted house full of ghosts.
And somehow you screw it up.
And somehow you didn't even screw it up. You just sort of made something that was like, oh. Like, you didn't even, like, ruin it. Like, you just sort of, like... I would love to see, like, someone, like... Take the same script. Screw it. I mean, it's not a good script, but take the same script and give this to someone brash. Give this to someone who's just gonna, like, just vamp it up.
Design it to the walls.
Yeah, like, the design is fine, but, like, really sell the design. Give Helen Mirren, like, lots of speeches. Have her, like, really go nuts. Because you really want her to go nuts. And instead she just sort of, yes, I'm in the movie. Oh, Helen, you deserve better. Yeah, it's a C-. It's not a low C-. This probably won't end up on my worst films of the year, because it's just sort of there.
Yeah,
but you don't need to seek this one out. And if you like to see every horror movie, this is a rental. This is a streaming whatever. This is not a big deal. So, bit of a shame. But there was only one of those, so we can just move right along to our big double feature of the week.
Hooray!
This week, all of the options were space operas. Big, spectacular outer space, different planet shenanigans with adventures and lasers and monsters and
a lot of weird spaceships and critters and
and
space herpes in one of them.
Dude, what? You didn't pick that one.
You didn't pick that one.
You didn't pick the one with space herpes. Just throwing it out there. Sometimes the one you haven't heard of is worth voting for.
People don't know about the ice pirates, and that's kind of a shame.
That's a shame. We tried.
So you didn't vote for the ice pirates.
You didn't vote for the ice pirates. You voted for a film that didn't bomb completely. Like it like made money, but it cost so much to make that it actually didn't make money, and it seriously injured Disney. I want you to think about that.
It lost so much money.
That Disney hurt.
The Disney hurt.
Yeah. And it has been postulated.
And they had to buy Star Wars to make up for it.
That has been postulated. This movie was such a big bomb. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing that you pointed out to me, and it's 100% true. Mm. For many, many, many decades now, Disney has, with occasional success, but mostly they've struggled to break into the action-adventure market.
Yeah.
They do a lot of family-friendly fairy tales, family movies, but when it comes down to daring do, when it comes down to explosions and gunfights and sword fights, they actually only have a handful of successes until they bought Marvel and Star Wars.
Which were not theirs. Those were established.
Yeah, they had to buy those outright. Uh-huh. They have a few. But mostly you go stuff like Tron, Black Hole, The Condor Man, The Rocketeer, which is amazing, but was not a big hit. They just
it's a cult hit now, but and it was a modest success at the time. But it was considered a failure.
And
it's
very high up on my list of the best superhero movies ever made.
Oh, for sure,
it's in the top 10 easily.
It was done by Joe Johnston, who went on to do one of the Marvel films for Disney.
Yeah,
and,
Captain America: The First Avenger, which has a very similar tone.
Yeah, for my money, The Rocketeer is far better, but
I'm not going to. I wouldn't fight you on that.
Superior film. Yeah. The way I put it is, Disney had little girls on a lock. Like with their Disney Princess brand, I think that's their most successful brand. Yeah. They were really good at capturing an audience of young girls. And
every time they tried to make one for young boys, The Black Cauldron, Treasure Planet, The Incredibles did well. That was an exception. The Cars was kind of aimed more at the young boy demographic.
But again, that's from the Pixar creative team. That's another something Disney had to buy.
Good point.
Anytime they really tried to do something for essentially little boys, they couldn't get through. And they were trying for a while there, if you recall, when they were doing animated features like Chicken Little and Meet the Robinsons, films that featured young boys as protagonists and were a lot more comedy-centered or action-centered. And indeed, those films are not really well regarded, are they?
And indeed, they changed the protagonist in Chicken Little to a young boy.
Yeah.
In order for that to work, it was originally, wasn't it like Holly Hunter was cast as Chicken Little?
Oh, I didn't know who they originally cast it, but I know they changed it.
And Zootopia was originally going to star the fox, and then they were just like, no, the rabbit's where it's all at. The rabbit's the story. So
the rabbit's the story.
Rabbit's what it's all about, and that's a way better movie for it, I guarantee you.
So John Carter was essentially, not their last, because they did The Lone Ranger after this, but it was one of their big attempts to start
and Pirates is another huge exception, to be fair. Well, Pirates was hugely successful.
In fact, Pirates was hugely successful,
yes.
And they took two lessons from Pirates. One, adapt our rides, which didn't work.
Have any of their other rides
previously they had done Mission to Mars, which was not a success.
That wasn't them.
Pardon?
That was a Disney movie?
It was a Disney film. De Palma did a Disney film based on the Disneyland ride Mission to Mars.
That was based on the ride.
It was based on the ride.
I'm looking that up. I've never even heard that
After they did Pirates of the Caribbean, they did The Haunted Mansion, which tanked.
That was
then they did Tomorrowland, which tanked hard. But yeah, they did Pirates, so they tried to do their own rides. That wasn't working.
It was a Buena Vista film. I don't know.
That's Disney.
Weird.
I think the Buena Vista brand is gone, but yeah, it was a Disney flick.
Weird. Okay, it doesn't even say that on like the IMDb page that it's based on the ride or the mission. Whatever. Yeah. Anyway,
but they also took this idea that, hey, if Pirates were a big success, maybe we can do other pulp type heroes in like big budget things, and it'll be just as successful.
And there was a time, you gotta remember, in like the 90s when the response to making Tim Burton's Batman wasn't, hey, let's do a whole bunch of other comic book heroes. It was, hey, let's do a whole bunch of other heroes from the 1930s and 40s. So we had films like Dick Tracy, The Shadow,
the Phantom.
The Phantom. Like that was the trend. Also, a lot of those movies are pretty good.
I think they're fine.
Yeah, a lot of them are good. I'm not a huge fan of The Phantom, but like the other ones we mentioned, those are good flicks.
I think The Phantom's fine. I'm one of the few fans of The Phantom.
I think The Shadow deserves another look. I think that movie's a lot of fun. I think the movie's really cool.
It's a Russell Mulcahy film, too.
Yeah, it's
The
a neat
Shadow.
flick.
So yeah, they were trying to say, hey, well, pirates are a big thing. Well, why don't we try something? What else? What other pulp heroes can we got? Well, they tried cowboys later on with the Lone Ranger.
Right.
And, Lone Ranger is a known property. How about, I don't know, what else? Tarzan. Well, not Tarzan, because we just did an animated Tarzan. So how about something else by Edgar Rice Burroughs? And they settled on John Carter of Mars, which is a series of science fiction novels written by Edgar Rice Burroughs, the author of Tarzan.
And indeed, Princess of Mars, the first John Carter of Mars book, was his first novel, and it was a huge, massive success, and it is one of the most influential books in science fiction fantasy.
Yeah.
And it kind of laid out the template for the sort of rough and tumble, heroic, save the princess, sort of frontier analogy for science fiction of young farm people going off into space, fighting monsters, saving the galaxy, and it is imprinted on every successful science fiction thing you've ever seen.
And make no mistake, those things are dripping with sex.
Oh, yeah.
Deja Thoris, the Princess of Mars, I looked up, like, artists' renderings of her, and I think in the book she's supposed to be, like, pretty much naked.
She's naked except for jewelry, which covers up her particular, like the Adam and Eve bits.
So, yeah, if you look up like, artist renderings of Deja Thoris, she's wearing, like, huge necklaces and, like, metal pasties, a little bikini bottom, big boots, and that's it.
Yeah.
So she is most assuredly, like, a male, like, almost a porn fantasy in a lot of ways.
That's true. However, she is actually rather well crafted as a character.
As the book, if you read the books, you see that she's actually an interesting character. So she serves two functions in the books.
Yeah.
Now Disney has decided to make a big budget film of this, and you know what? It's a good idea. Make a big budget science fiction epic out of the John Carter story.
Should have been done a long ass time ago.
In fact, had this been made in 1994, it probably would have been awesome, and it also would have bombed then.
And a ton of other filmmakers have tried to make this over the years. Jon Favreau was making this before Andrew Stanton. Andrew Stanton directed the version of John Carter we got. He was best known for directing Finding Nemo. This is his big live-action debut. This is around the time that Brad Bird made his live-action debut with Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. That was a huge success. Andrew Stanton, maybe he'll be the next Pixar filmmaker to make the transition. And this bombed, and he went back to making Finding Dory, and that was a huge hit, and he's doing okay. But yeah, John Carter, this is in production for a long time. People have been trying to make it for many, 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 many years, and it's another one of those situations, not unlike Brad Bird's The Incredibles, where kind of the imitators and the films that took inspiration from it were so successful that by the time we got to the thing that inspired them, it feels like old hat.
Well, Valerian, for goodness sake.
Well, yeah, Valerian obviously was, like John Carter, Valerian was a huge influence on Star Wars. But now that Star Wars came out, no one gave a crap. The Incredibles was such a great Fantastic Four movie that by the time we finally got like an official Fantastic Four movie, it felt like a lame version of The Incredibles, which is very disappointing on a variety of levels.
Well, we have The Incredibles, we're fine.
I still think there's room for Fantastic Four, but okay. I'm a big Fantastic Four fan. I love the books.
True.
I think they're great, but whatever. There was a time for like many years, like decades, I think, in which every cover of the Fantastic Four had the world's greatest comics magazine on it, and nobody questioned it. Everyone was like, well, yeah.
The world's greatest comics
Everyone
magazine.
was basically like, that's not false advertising. That's true. Like, that was, we all agree. Anyway. They deserve better movies.
Back to John Carter.
So we finally got a John Carter.
We finally got a John Carter film, and it's and it tanked. It tanked terribly, and
it's
part of it.
Huge.
A lot of people.
It didn't make like no money. I mean, it didn't make like $5 million and then peter out. It made hundreds of millions of dollars, but it cost so damn much. It cost
like $350 million after advertising, which they didn't
before advertising.
They didn't do. A lot of people like, and I hate to criticize films on this these grounds, but a lot of people point to its ad campaign as a reason why it didn't succeed. And
when you think about why a film is successful in theaters, I mean, if it has a long run where it stays in like the top 5, then yeah, a lot of that's word of mouth. But when it comes down to just no one saw it, marketing plays a huge part in that. It's whether people thought they needed to see it.
And I'd rather focus on the film's like artistic successes.
But when we're looking at why
looking at something why it tanked, they first of all they changed the title from John Carter of Mars to simply John Carter.
Well, they changed it from Princess of Mars to John Carter of Mars to John Carter.
Yeah, and John Carter, who's that? It's a boring name. There's nothing interesting about it, and they hammered on one single image from the film about a guy who's in an arena fighting these 2 gigantic white ape monsters, like these 4-armed, 12-foot tall gorilla monsters. And that's it. That's all we had. And that's only one scene in the movie.
Well, the other thing we had was just Taylor Kitsch, who is a perfectly okay actor, but apparently he was never going to happen because he was also in Battleship, and that didn't do well either. But
he's a boring leading man is the problem.
He's an okay actor. He's just he's not going to.
You need somebody with a lot more charisma than he has.
But which fair enough. Anyway, my point is that there were also posters of just him against a red background. I was at the junket for John Carter of Mars. Okay. And Andrew Stanton, this is even before the movie came out. Usually before a movie comes out, no one is critical of anyone involved in the production at all. Because it's not in your best interest. You want to keep the narrative positive. You want to support everybody. And then, after the movie comes out, you wait a couple of months, and only then can you say, this person dropped the ball. Mm-hmm. Before the movie came out, Andrew Stanton was asked about the title and the marketing campaign. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, I don't have the quote in front of me, but it's there and you can find it online. He said that they wanted to call it Princess of Mars, but then they were just like, we're trying to cater to a different demographic. Let's take princess out of it. People will think it's a Disney princess movie. He's like, okay, fine. We'll call it John Carter of Mars. And then the marketing department was like, Mars movies don't do well. Mission to Mars didn't do well. Red Planet didn't do well.
Mars Attacks is...
Rocket Man. No one wants Mars movies. So can we just call it John Carter? And his compromise was, I will call it John Carter at the beginning. And at the end of the movie, when we show the title again, it'll be John Carter of Mars to show a character progression. So he starts off on Earth, he goes to Mars, and he becomes John Carter of Mars. Like a Martian. And that was his... Okay, so that was what I'll do. And then the marketing campaign starts, and it's all Taylor Kitsch on a red background. It's red, 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 red. And he asked the marketing team, why is everything super red? And they said, so people will know it's set on Mars. Facepalm.
Yeah, I had it in the title.
Yeah, we could
have broadcast that a little bit more clearly.
If you're going to make it a thing,
Now, to the film itself, maybe one of the reasons it didn't succeed is because it's convoluted and it's difficult to follow, and it's actually not all that exciting because it's 2.5 hours of convoluted storytelling. One of the bad lessons they also took from Pirates of the Caribbean is, let's make it as convoluted as possible.
See, here's my thing. I really don't think it's that convoluted. I've seen this movie a couple of times, and I liked this movie the first time I saw it.
Okay.
To be clear. It's maybe not the best thing ever, but I really had a good time with it, and I think a lot of it works. I think the biggest problem with John Carter of Mars, and we'll talk you through the whole plot in a minute, but the opening scene sucks. You take that opening scene out. The opening scene is Dominic West, who plays the bad guy. They're on Mars. There's a big airship battle between people we don't know yet. We don't know why they're fighting. We don't give a shit about any of them.
The ghost of Mark Strong is standing there.
Yeah, so they're fighting, and it's kind of confusing to watch, actually. A lot of the action of the movie is actually very clean and clear to follow and very exciting. This is just, I don't know what the fuck is going on. I don't know who these people are, why I should care. And then Mark Strong stops a fight between people I don't know and gives one of them a blue sticky glove thing.
He gives him a power glove.
He gives him a power glove, and then he's just like, and now thingy. And Dominic West is like, ooh, thingy. And then the credits, and I'm like, that's a confused... You take that scene out. That scene just opens the movie up with such confusion that you can't get your bearings afterwards. I feel like that scene was probably added to the movie later, added to the script later, to have it start off with a whole bunch of action.
And it's because right after that, it cuts back to Earth in the 1860s. It's
after Civil War.
Post Civil War.
Shortly after Civil War.
1870s around.
Yeah.
And then it's 20 minutes of somebody riffling through Edgar Rice Burroughs' estate. for like 15 minutes. And,
Not
you know,
that long, but
you,
like
you,
it's
you
a big-
start your action epic with no action, and it's just going to be 15 minutes of that. That's also a bad opening.
Well,
so it's one bad opening followed by another bad opening, and then finally we get to meet John Carter, who's not an interesting guy. Who stumbles into a cave and finds a magical amulet which transports him to Mars. Okay, we're already off to a rocky start.
I agree it's too many beginnings. I think you take off that first beginning, and what you've got is, it opens with Edgar Rice Burroughs, played by the kid from Spy Kids.
Daryl Sabara.
And he gets a telegram from his favorite uncle, John Carter, who's wealthy, to come immediately.
Again, that's a bad idea.
Hang on. I don't think that's how the book begins.
How John Carter is the author's uncle? Like the actual author?
Yes.
Yeah, all right.
That's actually the first part of the book.
Oh, okay.
They didn't make that one up. That's in there.
Paint me ignorant. I still think that's a bad idea.
You can say it's a bad opening all you want, but the point is that they didn't pull it out of a hat. Like, they're working with precedent here. So what happens is, Guy finds out that his uncle died. And his uncle dies under mysterious circumstances. And they say, hey, listen, your uncle has been put, unembalmed, put into a tomb on his own estate, which is locked and it can only be opened from the inside. Bit of a mystery, okay. And he left you his diary. And he's just reading the diary. And then we cut to, shortly after the Civil War, John Carter, who fought for the Confederacy, which we don't really talk about too much. We kind of let that go. Maybe don't delve into too much about what he did during the Civil War. John Carter, after the Civil War, his whole family has died. We find out more detail what happened later, but his whole family has died. He's traumatized, and they're trying to recruit him back to the army in order to fight off the Apaches, and he doesn't want any part of that. Look, I saw too much war. War was terrible. War sucks. War killed my family. Everything about war is fucking stupid. I'm just trying to find gold, make it rich, and retire. That's it. That's all I want.
I will, however, get involved in war if there's Martians and a hot babe involved.
I don't think that's fair. He gets involved in it because he's actually... Okay, that's the whole point is someone who's... It's like the Quiet Man. I'm trying to stay out of fighting. There's finally something to fight for that actually, I think, matters, as opposed to arbitrarily we hate these people. That's what he tries to stay out of. You could say that's still troubling messaging, but that's his arc. That's the whole point.
I understand that's the arc. That's the arc in the script. Functionally, when you have an action film and the action is supposed to be big and exciting, you're telling a different story. The message is different.
I think the biggest...
If war is going to be exciting under any circumstances, then you can't have any sort of fighting for the right reason message.
Well, what about there's the centerpiece of the movie, which I think is really well handled, and I think Michael Giacchino scores the shit out of it, is the first scene where John Carter really fights. And he's fighting in order to save Deja Thoris, who is escaping, and he really cares about her. And he's fighting. He's also fighting because he's getting rid of all of this pent-up PTSD rage. And it's him fighting an entire army single-handed. And it's really, really cool. And it keeps cutting back to his dead family to remind you that this isn't cool. This is actually really fucked up.
Yeah.
I think that sequence actually does a really good job of A, being kind of an amazing sequence in a vacuum, and B, kind of nixing that kind of irony that you're talking about here. I think it's really effective, dramatically.
I think I've just lost interest in the type of scenes in science fiction movies where one guy charges into an army and, like, murders 1,000 people.
Fair enough. I think this is one of the better...
That's not cool anymore.
I think this is one of the better examples of it because they did something different with it emotionally. And they made it sad.
But
I think that's cool. I think it's cool that it's sad.
It's cool that it's sad.
It's cool that it's not cool.
Anyway, John Carter finds an amulet in a cave and is teleported to Mars. Because Mars has lower gravity, his muscles allow him to jump really high.
And makes him stronger, which is pseudoscience, but whatever.
Well, everything's really sort of lightweight and spindly, so I'm guessing everything's just sort of lightweight in general because of the light gravity. So you can get away with making spindlier things that won't fall apart underneath their own weight.
This also comes from the original book, and this is also, if you want to talk more about the influence of John Carter, you know how Superman has superpowers only here because of our yellow sun? Boom.
Yeah.
I guarantee you that was a major influence.
However, he wouldn't be able to keep those powers. His muscles would eventually adapt to the gravity, and he'd lose his jumping power.
But never mind. But whatever.
They don't like pretty quickly too. Probably over the course of a couple of days, he would start losing those muscles.
But whatever. We're gonna let that go.
We're gonna let it
At
slide
some
for
point,
now.
this is science fantasy and not sci-fi.
He finds himself entrenched in a gigantic Martian civil war that has 4 sides to it. There's
3 really. Like there's the
there's the red team and the blue team of more or less,
and the green team,
and there's the green team.
Yeah, it's 3.
There's and then there's like the evil wizards.
Oh, the March. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought of them as more manipulating it than actually a part of it. But yeah, fair enough.
There's the Atreides and the Harkonnens, and there's the Fremen, and then there's the Bene Gesserit. So
it feels more like to me. It feels more like the North, the South, and the Native Americans.
Yeah.
So what we've got here,
and then like some shadowy government organization.
Yeah. So we've got Deja Thoris as the princess of the good guys
of the city of Helium.
Yeah. Okay.
Named after the gas, I suppose.
Neat. And she's trying to stave off war. Dominic West is the leader of the blue guys.
Yeah. And let's pause on Deja Thoris for a second, because she's the best character in the piece.
She's so cool.
And she's played by an actress named Lynn Collins, who is the best actress in the piece.
There's an alternate reality in which this was so successful that right afterwards someone greenlit Wonder Woman and she was Wonder Woman.
She would have been a great Wonder Woman.
And I love Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. I love her as Wonder Woman. Lynn Collins would have also been an amazing Wonder Woman. Holy shit.
Yeah.
She is so fucking charismatic and smart and cool and alluring and just interesting and
Her dad has orchestrated a wedding between her and Dominic West as a way of making peace, but she really, really, really doesn't want to marry Dominic West. Meanwhile, Dominic West is being manipulated by a shadowy, shape-shifting wizard played by Mark Strong, who gave him the power glove at the beginning.
Yep. Which is an all-powerful weapon to end the war.
For ends we don't really understand right away, or is ever really made clear.
They're just shadowy They're basically gods. They're like the gods in the Iliad or in the Odyssey, where they're having a direct. They're influencing the wars of man, but for whatever reason they want, who gives a shit?
And they're a little too intimately involved. If they were somehow distant, or we saw their perspective from it, maybe it would have worked better.
Yeah.
Also, there's the natives, who are the Thark or the Tharks.
Yeah.
And they are like 9 foot tall, really skinny, betusked 4-armed aliens.
Yeah, they have 4 arms. They literally have 4 arms. And they're led by, in the beginning of the movie, although this changes over the course of the film, Willem Dafoe as Tars Tarkas, who also gives a really good performance.
Well, it's motion capture,
but it's still cool. Like, I really like Tars Tarkas as a character. Tars Tarkas is the first alien on Mars to see John Carter when he arrives. And John Carter's jumping around the place, and he's very confused, as you imagine, because no one's written John Carter yet, so he doesn't know how sci-fi works. I always love it in movies where like there's like it takes place like before the genre exists, because you see that in a lot of zombie movies where there were no zombie movies in this universe. Everyone has to figure out zombies, and everyone in the audience is just like, get on with it.
We know.
Yeah, so I always love it when there's like some vampire movie that takes place before Dracula was written, and all the rules got really popular, and they actually have to figure it out beforehand, so he has no idea what the fuck's going on. Tars Tarkas sees this little white ape, is what they call him, and he's just jumping around like Superman used to, and other things Superman, just jumping huge distances. And he's inspired. He thinks that there's magic in the world again. So he like grabs him, he has them like raised as a Thark, and it's pretty fun.
They give him magical translation juice. They pour liquid down his throat, and all of a sudden he can speak all the native languages.
Every sci-fi story that takes place on other planets has to deal with the language barrier at some point.
I think after Douglas Adams sort of took the piss out of that, it's like, we can't do that anymore.
Everyone's just like, we don't care. There's a universal language translator in Star Trek now. It's fine. No one cares.
That also somehow like projects lips onto people, so it looks like they're also speaking, like their lips look like they're speaking English as well.
God, that bothers me. I find that really distracting.
It's the one conceit you just sort of have to roll with.
Otherwise, we don't have a show or movie.
Although, luckily on Discovery, they've been really good about having Klingon speakers only speak Klingon, like even when they're in the same room together. Like on Next Generation, 2 Klingons are alone in a room together and they're speaking English. Well, because we're watching them, we're humans. We don't speak Klingon. Most of us don't speak Klingon.
There was a good gag about that in Doctor Who. Did you ever see the Doctor Who episode about Mount Vesuvius?
I did.
Yeah. So they go so the whole thing in Doctor Who, if you don't watch Doctor Who, and you should, Doctor Who is great. When you fly around the universe in the TARDIS, the Doctor's spaceship, it has an automatic translator. So whatever time period you go to, whatever planet you go to, you can understand everyone and everyone can understand you. The Doctor takes his then companion Donna to
Pompeii.
Pompeii just before Mount Vesuvius erupts, and she's just kind of getting used to this whole language thing, and she starts throwing out Latin, and she starts saying like "Vini Vidi Vici," and everyone's just like, "Are you speaking Celtic?" That's the guy. Everyone thinks she's speaking she's speaking another language all of a sudden. She like broke the automatic translator.
Actually speaking Latin to Latin speakers breaks the translator.
Which is a funny gag. So yeah, you gotta come up with a lot of these gags. But another thing that John Carter kind of invented, to give it some credit.
We forgot he accumulates a dog? Question mark?
It's a dog who's one with the Speed Force.
It essentially can, like, it has like 8 legs and can run super duper fast, like lightning quick dog, and has this gigantic head. It's a really ugly design.
I know, but it's adorably ugly though. It's like a bulldog. No, I want that dog. Right. I like that dog.
I think they could have designed it to make it look a little bit more like, I don't know, cute animal rather than just this big flat rock with a drooly face.
I like dogs that are just kind of,
like pugs and bulldogs.
Yeah, I like pugs and bulldogs. I think they're cute. They got like they're. I like this dog. The dog has a great personality, and the speed thing makes it really fun. There's a whole bit where he's trying to avoid the dog by super jumping, but every time he jumps and then lands, the dog's already there, and he's really confused.
The dog can run that fast.
And there's this really cool bit where the dog like saves his life when he's like kidnapped by Mark Strong's character, and there's this cool bit where it's just the dog's POV like zooming through the city in like this really elaborate way, and it's cool. There's a lot of tension to it. It works great. Anyway. They run across Deja Thoris, who is trying to escape from getting married to Dominic West. There's a fun bit where John Carter like leaps hundreds of yards to land on one of the ships and like just takes her aside and says, "Don't worry, ma'am, I'll take care of this." Gets the crap kicked out of him, and she takes his sword. "Don't worry, I'll take care of this."
She actually repeats the line because she is actually far more capable and fun and interesting.
Yeah, I paraphrase. That's not quite the line, but like, so we already love her.
Why don't I take care of this? There's a version of this story without John Carter in it that I think is far more interesting.
It's just her.
If you had a movie that's about her and took place just on Mars, and it was just this kind of bizarre fantasy epic that had no humans in it at all, I think we would have been able to sort of suspend our disbelief a little bit more.
Right.
It would have trimmed down the story a lot because we wouldn't have had to spend all this time uncovering secrets for the Earthman. We wouldn't have had that stupid bookend story. We could have just focused on what was important in the story. Deja Thoris doesn't want to get married.
Right.
She runs off. Assembles a ragtag team of like native aliens and ends up making peace on her own. And I think there's enough material there and to make a nice, trim science fiction film. You don't need this 2.5-hour bloated epic with John Carter in it. That they cast Taylor Kitsch really bogs it down because Taylor Kitsch is not sprightly. Like, you're talking about how Willem Dafoe's character thinks there's magic again. There's not a single moment with Taylor Kitsch where he's kind of dazzled by what's going on.
Yeah, I agree.
He's not really astonished about anything that's happening.
He's okay, but you needed someone. You needed. I hate to say this because Lone Ranger tanked. You needed Armie Hammer. You needed someone who's got like some wonder to him and some naive charm. Here's the thing. But here's the thing, though. For better and worse, John Carter is a masculine power fantasy.
For sure it is.
And indeed, you look at the history of Edgar Rice Burroughs, before he wrote John Carter, I mean, he was like trying to be like a soldier and he kept failing at it, and he tried to be a successful businessman and he kept failing at it. His life was a series of
failed masculinity.
And so he wrote a fantasy about that. That's John Carter is one of the original masculine power fantasies, at least in terms of science fiction and fantasy. So that's what this is about. And bear in mind, remember, he was on the losing side of the Confederacy, too. So all of a sudden, he is the hero soldier of the war. Yeah. So that's what this is. This is about this disenfranchised white dude who goes to a
disenfranchised Confederate is redeemed through war. I'm not sure if that's so healthy.
It's a bit troubling, and the movie tries to sidestep it as much as possible by having him be a conscientious objector and all this kind of stuff, but it's all in the DNA. So that's kind of what it's all about. And again, there has been, since the creation of John Carter, there has been no shortage of male power fantasies, especially white male power fantasies. There has been no shortage. And so as a result, this rather stripped down version of it, which has some clunky sort of construction because it was the first one to do it, kind of doesn't play as well as it should. I still think it mostly plays in this very retro, pulpy kind of way, flaws and all. I look at something like, you read the works of Robert E. Howard, and they have distinctive flaws, but what you're picking off of it is the energy and sort of the unbridled zeal of it. And that's something I do get from John Carter. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm, particularly from Andrew Stanton, as a filmmaker, who clearly loves all of this. Like, you can tell, like, the filmmaker has a lot of affection for the material, and I think that rubs off. Anyway, so he fights a bunch of people. Mark Strong kidnaps him. Deja Thoris is going to be forced to be married to Dominic West. He has to go back to the Thark and, like, basically become their leader through gladiatorial combat, which is a cool the whole sequence is cool, and you can tell
in a hurry, but
you can tell that whole gladiator sequence was what like that sort of thing, that sort of idea helped inspire more of Star Wars. You'll hear like Episode 2, for example, and then he assembles the Tharks, and then they rush off. They dash away, last minute cavalry charge to stop the wedding, and they go to the wrong city.
Oops!
And Willem Dafoe slaps him in the head, and boy, does that need to be a more popular GIF. That's just slapping.
Oh shoot! It's the wrong city. Yeah, he just turns to him. Idiot.
Yeah, and then they have to dash across the planet basically to get to the other city, which adds a little suspense. That's fun. There's a big fight sequence. They save the day, and
that they dashed off to the wrong city. I mean, it's a funny bit, but it so interrupts the pacing of the film, and it's also such a lame attempt at humor, which is something else that Disney has been really, really bad at over the years. Have you seen any of, like, sort of going back to Chicken Little, Meet the Robinsons, even Bolt?
I actually haven't seen any of those movies, to be perfectly honest.
Nobody saw any of those. Home on the Range. When they're trying to be sort of broadly funny, their humor falls really, really flat. I don't know what it is about
Emperor's New Groove.
Okay,
that one's funny.
The Emperor's New Groove is legit,
and that's ironic because that movie, the production of that movie was a fucking nightmare. It changed like 100 times. Like, you research like how Emperor's New Groove got made and see like how like it's a miracle that the movie even plays, let alone is actually pretty good.
and that director who did Emperor's New Groove, his name is Mark Dindal. He previously had done a film called Cats Don't Dance in the late 90s, which is great.
Oh.
Scott Bakula plays a singing, dancing cat who tries to break into 30s Hollywood. It's pretty great.
For so long, I confused that movie with Oliver and Company. Like, I thought I had seen it, but I had seen Oliver and Company.
No, Cats Don't Dance. Anthropomorphic cat tries to break into Hollywood in the 1930s.
Done.
But all of the good roles go to humans. And animals don't get the good roles.
That's pointed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not
pointed.
It's kind of pointed. But
so was Who Framed Roger Rabbit. That was a cultural commentary as well.
But yeah, he has a really good sort of knack for slapstick. So I attribute The Emperor's New Groove success to him.
Perhaps.
Because he didn't do Cats Don't Dance for Disney.
Perhaps.
But yeah, I feel like there were, like, Johnny Depp brought so much lightness and humor, and there were so many funny lines in Pirates of the Caribbean. They decide, let's try to do similar type of humor for something like John Carter.
Occasionally take the piss out of it, yeah.
Well, not really bothering to ask whether or not that's appropriate for what the film or what the scene needs. And by charging off to the wrong city, on paper, that's hilarious. Oh no, we went to the wrong city and a guy gets slapped. But this is right during the climax of the film. You need to just keep on charging ahead. Keep it moving, please. And I feel like every time it starts a little bit ahead of a steam, it interrupts itself, either with a joke or some extra storyline involving like a Thark princess or exposition or that big tree thing that the wizards are in charge of, and we learn that's big like network of planets that's hidden within this tree, and we'll get a hint at what these wizards might be up to. It's like, why are we seeing all of this? You're just sort of distracting me from the point, which is pointing the camera at Deja Thoris.
Because she's great.
She's a
great character.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for that. I think it's one of the things that keeps the movie from being great. I do think that a lot of what you're talking about is an attempt to take the curse off of a very unapologetic and frankly sometimes thudding male power fantasy. There's a recurring bit where Tars Tarkas introduces himself as Tars Tarkas of Thark or whatever. And John Carter says John Carter, Virginia, and he's like, "Oh, Virginia! Everyone meet Virginia!" And then, like, when he after he beats up like two giant monsters in the gladiator ring, everyone starts chanting "Virginia, Virginia!" And I think part of that is to just sort of sap away some of that, just that maleness that is, and there's nothing wrong with having a story about masculinity or the masculine mindset.
It's just that we've had a
ton of them,
one or two of those in the past,
and so like having like taken the piss out of that a little bit makes a lot of sense to me, especially when you've got Deja Thoris obviously stealing the whole movie. Lynn Collins runs away with this movie, and you're right. Part of me is like, I would love to see a movie that's just about her, and that's not John Carter, because then you're just making a different story altogether, because this is what it is. But like, yeah, I totally agree. But I digress. Anyway, they save the day. John Carter marries Deja Thoris, and then on their wedding night, he's kind of wistful, looking back up at Earth, thinking, and then Mark Strong sends him back to Earth. Right after John Carter, like an idiot, had thrown away his medallion that could send him back to Earth because he wanted to stay on Mars for forever. So now he's trapped on Earth, and it sucks. So he has spent the last many, many years taking all the gold he found in this mine, trying to find another medallion, trying to find like another grail, trying to find another holy relic or something that will send him back to Mars. And the whole death thing was part of faking it and finding a way back to Mars. Anyway, I still like this movie. I know you're very critical of it, and there's stuff to criticize, and we'll never argue that. But I think in terms of like, I think there's this weird thing that happened with Star Wars where everyone loves Star Wars, but all the things that are kind of like Star Wars get shoved aside. And I've seen trailers for movies. Like I saw a trailer for something like Valerian, I think it was. Valerian or Ghost in the Shell, one of those big production design movies last year. Regardless of quality, the trailers looked like a bunch of neat stuff was in it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I saw the trailer for Valerian, and everyone was like, ooh, this looks amazing. And I literally heard someone say, oh, it's going to be the new Star Wars. This looks fantastic. And then it said Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets. And then they were just like, oh. And they lost interest.
Because it's not Star Wars.
Yeah, it's like Star Wars, which, by the way, was inspired by all of this. The only reason we have Star Wars is because George Lucas couldn't get the rights to Flash Gordon. That's true. He tried, he couldn't, he made up his own thing that was very much like Flash Gordon.
And then they made a Flash Gordon film, and it's awesome.
It is awesome, and it wasn't as popular as Star Wars.
In my mind, it is.
I know.
I enjoy watching Flash Gordon way more than I enjoy watching Star Wars.
Flash Gordon is a lot of fun. Flash Gordon is another one that takes the piss out of it a lot, but that's like its whole raison d'etre, so it works a little better.
Yeah, well, and you were going to say there's this sort of pulp funness to it, but you're also talking about how it takes the piss out of a male power fantasy, and I think you can't really have it both ways with something like John Carter. Either sell it or don't, and I don't think there is a lot of that sort of pulp fun. I think it becomes the whole idea with pulp, the word pulp evokes a kind of narrative simplicity that John Carter doesn't have.
It's not that complicated. I'm amazed you find it that complicated.
I think there's way too much going on.
There's a civil war between two people. Why? Because one of them's bad and one of them's good. That's really simple. Hang on. There's a group of other people, indigenous people of Mars, who are kind of trying to stay out of it, and they get pulled in for the right reasons. And then there are a couple of people manipulating the war. That's it. That's not that complicated.
In terms of just sort of laying out the story beats, perhaps not. But if you have a character who's being introduced to each one of these worlds, and you have to spend time exploring how each of these things functions and how all of the myriad characters all interact with one another, you're adding far too much detail to something that could be done with a lot less. If they had spent less time on it, perhaps, it would have some of that pulp appeal. It needs to feel kind of cheap in order to have that pulp appeal, and this has way too much money on the screen.
Maybe. I think you're right. I think there's a big problem is I think Andrew Stanton takes it really seriously, and I think every attempt to sort of turn John Carter into something a bit more modern, it falls a little flat.
Yeah.
I still think this movie, like, when this movie came out, people were saying it's like the worst thing ever. People were really anti this movie. And even I think, you're not a big fan, but it's not shit.
No.
This is a perfectly, at worst, I gave it a higher rating this when I came out, but like, at worst, this is a perfectly functional 2.5 to 3 star sci-fi extravaganza with some really fun stuff in it, some really cool visuals. A lot of the production design, the music's really, really great. Lynn Collins rescues a lot of the movie, so does Willem Dafoe. This is not a bad movie. Maybe it's not a particularly great movie, as I used to think it was, and I admit there are flaws with it now, but I still really, really dig it. But it's not bad. This isn't like the huge, thudding failure everyone said it was. And in fact, when it finally came out on home video, I went to various stores to try to acquire a copy, because I liked it.
Uh-huh.
And what I found was they couldn't keep it in stock. Multiple stores, multiple places said, "Oh yeah, John Carter. Yeah, everyone wants that." No, it's like doing real well on home video. So
all right.
There are people who dig that movie.
I'm
glad it found an audience, even if it was too late to save everyone's careers and Star Wars from Disney. Oh, that was harsh. I'm kidding. I like a lot of what Disney is doing with Star Wars. It's fine.
I like what they're doing with Star Wars. We didn't need it. John, I just wish that what had happened with John Carter in home video happened with Mars Needs Moms.
Yeah.
That was another big effects-heavy science fiction epic that lost Disney a big chunk of change. Mars Needs Moms. Again, there's probably a good movie to be made in Mars Needs Moms. I need to see it. I haven't been able to find it. You can't find Mars Needs Moms anywhere.
It's gone.
It's just vanished from the
consciousness. No one asked for it, and now it's gone.
It only cost $250 million.
We had a lot of ideas about what to pair this with. We thought about a lot of like westerns, a lot of frontier type of films.
It's a very traditional white man goes native narrative, which is actually a story that predates Edgar Rice Burroughs even.
True. You look at something like the works of James Fenimore Cooper with Last of the Mohicans and The Deer Slayer, and it's something that Hollywood does over and over again. It's what Avatar is.
Yeah, Avatar's Dances with Wolves. Everyone says, it's just Dances with Wolves. Actually, it's much older than that.
Avatar, by the way, is also John Carter.
Look at the
construction of it.
Very much John Carter.
It's John Carter.
How Avatar struck it and John Carter didn't, who's to say?
I don't know. But because I think Avatar also has enormous narrative problems and a protagonist who sucks. What we decided on, and I'm really glad we did, because after rewatching it, I never realized how much of a riff this was on John Carter as well. What we decided on was Paul Verhoeven's, not Len Wiseman's, Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall, which I'm going to go out around and say, one of my favorite movies.
Really?
Oh, I love this movie. This movie was a huge influence on me when I was a kid.
It's great. I'm not going to say no bad things about Total Recall, but yeah. I saw this when it first came out, and it was 91.
90.
And 90.
Yeah.
Okay. It was the year I turned 12. It scared the bejesus out of me, this movie. The scenes of like people breaking their masks on the surface of Mars and their eyeballs bulging out.
Wasn't that cool?
And this like wet, slimy man emerging from another man's stomach. That stuff scared the heck out of me.
It's a gross movie.
Nightmares about that. Yeah, it's really slimy and weird.
Paul Verhoeven loves filming violence, but he wants you to know how violent it is.
Yeah.
No one at all has, I don't know where he gets them, or they make them specifically for him. I have never seen squibs that look as disgusting as they do in Paul Verhoeven's world. You don't get shot. Little tiny grenades go off in your body. Like, it's gross. It's really violent. The violent feels so violent. The violent feels so violent. That's what I said.
We need that on a t-shirt now.
The violent feels so violent.
The violent is violence is like a failed 90s band.
Yeah.
But, yeah, if you remember that scene in RoboCop where Murphy just gets shot to pieces,
God. It's one of the most disgustingly
you can't even
violent.
Watch that.
It's one of the most disgustingly violent scenes in history, and it's towards the beginning of the movie, and they're doing it to the hero. Holy shit!
That's to establish the tone of this movie.
Oh my god!
So yeah, Total Recall, nice R-rated violent film, a lot of goop and a lot of blood. This is the one where a man is hanging off the edge of an elevator, and it's like in an open space, but then it goes up inside a shaft.
And his arms get ripped off.
Arms get ripped right off.
It's fucked up.
And we see his armless body falling, and he's screaming as he falls, going, "Oh no, I'm falling!" I'd be a little more concerned about my arms at that moment.
And Arnold Schwarzenegger's just carrying the arms with him. And he doesn't even have like a cool... He has like one cool one-liner, and by cool I mean lame, where he's like...
Consider that a divorce? Is that his?
Oh, I guess that is one. Okay, it's two. The other one was when he like takes a power drill, like a giant power drill to someone and kills them, and says, "Screw you!"
It's not a screwdriver, it's a drill.
I know. But like, he doesn't even have one when he pulls off like one of the main bad guys' arms. Just like, "You've been disarmed." Like, he doesn't...
Feral arms, anything.
Yeah, let me give you a hand. Like, nothing. He just says, "See you at the party, Richter."
I think he has the severed... Like, he's holding both of the severed arms. He stands up and he's still holding them. And doesn't he throw them toward the camera?
Yeah, he throws them back in.
Yeah.
That's not what the movie is about. This is also an adaptation of a science fiction classic called We Can Remember It For You Wholesale.
Have you read the story?
I actually haven't read that one. I've read a lot of Philip K. Dick, but for whatever reason I haven't read that one.
I have.
If you've ever seen, and I'm sorry if you have, the movie Paycheck, which is not a good movie.
No, it's not.
The short story it's based on is fucking incredible, and boy, would that make a great movie, and I'm amazed they didn't make that one.
Yeah.
They just took the basic premise and they fucked it up.
Yeah.
It's so much a better story.
Well, We Can Remember It for Your Wholesale is a short story, so it's actually a lot trim, and it's a lot more of a gag. So in the short story, and this is what they took for the movie, is it's about a boring blue-collar guy who wants a more interesting life, and he goes to a clinic who can implant memories in your brain.
Yeah.
So you can essentially have memories of going on vacation
without taking time off work.
Yeah. So and it's a really brief process. Like, you go in and out, and it's done in an afternoon. So you can have this week-long vacation put in your head, and you're okay. And he decides in the short story that he wants to be a spy. He wants to have like a spy vacation. We're going to put in memories of you, and it turns out you're part of this shadowy cabal of spies, and we're going to put in all these details and all these people you met. And it turns out it doesn't work so well because he actually is a spy.
Yeah.
And he's actually somehow recalling he's already been deprogrammed, and this recall company, the vacation company, is re-implanting memories he already kind of had. And he gets in the movie, he gets embroiled in this big epic spy plot. In the story, it's all like it's mostly in the clinic. It's like, oh no, all of these secrets are going to be revealed because we actually uncovered this spy. What do we do? Oh, well, we'll just have to cover it with something like even more outlandish, something that couldn't possibly be true. So it's like, well, how about this fantasy about how he's been in contact with aliens, and aliens are going to come down and take over the planet. And it turns out that's also true. And that's the gag in the short story. So
in the movie, it takes that basic premise. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a blue collar guy. He's a construction worker. I always like it in an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie
when they try to make him into a normal guy.
Yeah, because he doesn't work in Jingle All the Way. Like, I don't quite buy. Like, man, he really is. Or like or even in like Batman and Robin, where like, yes, Dr. Victor Fries, an expert in biochemistry and also an Olympic bodybuilder. What? They're just gonna throw that in as okay.
I think the idea was he was like little before he put on that big suit, and then he became a big strong man. But when he takes off the suit, he's still Arnold Schwarzenegger in that movie.
But the thing, he wasn't little, so they had to justify why he was that big. And it always just seems like okay, you had to add that in because Arnold Schwarzenegger. Here, he's got a burly job. It makes sense that he would be incredibly buff.
And there's a scene where he's like working with like laser drills with other burly guys.
Yeah, so that actually functions. He's married to Sharon Stone before she was really famous. She'd been in other stuff, but
Alan Quartermain.
Yes. I think she was it He Said, She Said she was in. She was in one of those early, not particularly good Wes Craven horror movies. She was around. But her big break was in Basic Instinct, and this wasn't that. Although I bet this helped because she's really a knockout in this movie.
Met Paul Verhoeven.
That's a good point.
Both movies.
Yeah, that's a good point. So like, she's fun in this, and it led to bigger stuff. He's married to her, and he is unhappy. He sees. It's interesting because you see him watch the news. And the news is all about how there are like terrorist organizations on Mars, and they're like shooting up the place. And then he watches
the future. So Mars has been colonized.
Oh yeah, it's an indeterminate point in the future, but it's pretty far. There are colonies on Saturn as well. Apparently, we never see them, but that's a thing. And there's a colony on Mars.
Saturn's a gas planet, but okay.
They probably mean the moon.
Saturn moon, yeah.
So he sees that there's this horrible like shooting spree on Mars, and his Sharon Stone's like, turn that off. It's first thing in the morning. Let's start the day off nice. And he just says, let's move to Mars. And you're just like, what?
It's more exciting.
Like, what? This would be like, and I'm not trying to make light of anything, but it would be very strange if you woke up one day and your spouse says, let's move to Darfur. And you're like, what?
Let's go to the front, darling.
Really? Why? And he's just that bored. And he decides to go to Total Recall, or Recall is what it's called, to get a vacation set on Mars. And at first he's content to just get a regular vacation. And then they sell him on a new package, which they call the Eco Trip. Very pointed. In which you also get to be a spy. And he thinks that's neat. So he goes in there, and it's very telling some of the things he says. They tell him, just be honest about what you want. We're going to give you, like, a sexy Bond girl.
Yeah,
to have while you're there.
So don't lie about like the body type.
Don't lie about your sexuality. Just be honest. And the first thing he does is not describe his wife.
Yeah.
which is very, very telling. And
It's like he describes somebody who's athletic, sleazy, and demure.
yeah, all
Sleazy
together.
and demure?
And brunette,
And,
and
yeah.
like just which Sharon Stone is most definitely not. So it's like
So
really just not my wife. And you're just like,
Well, and
okay, you're
the wife represents sort of his old boring life. So of course
Exactly.
he wants a more exciting.
and again,
female
So
companion in
basically,
his
this is
fantasy
about
world.
someone, and they decide that his trip is you go to Mars. There are alien artifacts on Mars. You end up in the middle of a huge revolution on Mars. Your power fantasy is John Carter.
Yeah, more or less.
This is about Arnold Schwarzenegger paying an organization to make him John Carter of Mars.
And of course the big.
And in fact, the whole point of the whole like alien conspiracy going on Mars is to turn on a giant generator that will give atmosphere to Mars and ruin a company's monopoly on providing air to Mars. By the way, this isn't in the motion picture John Carter, but it is in the book. The plot of the book, it's about starting an atmosphere generator on Mars.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
So what they did was they
know
took
what?
Philip K. Dick's book and they added John Carter.
And you know, Paul Verhoeven was not doing that by accident.
Probably not.
Even if he wasn't necessarily like studying Edgar Rice Burroughs specifically, you know that he knew sort of the tropes of the, sort of that all-American fantasy. And
Huge point of his
plays like a lot of. Here's what I like about Verhoeven's movies. He makes really when he makes films in English, he makes really aggressively American films, told from clearly the perspective of an outsider,
a critical outsider.
A critical outsider.
He's basically a film critic if the film is America.
He's taking America and he's kind of amplifying it in such a way to make it look a little absurd. RoboCop takes place in Detroit. Starship Troopers is very much about American militarism
and exceptionalism.
Yeah.
And equating us to fascists, which is great.
Yeah, I love Starship Troopers.
I love Starship Troopers,
like,
too.
It's only gotten better over the years.
Even Showgirls is kind of this weird outsider idea, trying to like apply European ideas of sexuality to the American sex industry, which makes it very strange. That one doesn't quite work.
I love that movie too, mostly because it's bad. But
it's a strange motion picture.
It's a strange
so weird
movie. And here, that it makes total sense that he would look at sort of the typical American male, an Austrian man, and try to explode and amplify and that sort of American male fantasy, and in so doing, satirize it.
And it's very clever to do that with Arnold Schwarzenegger as the lead, because at that point, Arnold Schwarzenegger, biggest movie star in the world, made a lot of great movies. Like he's on he's made some crap like throughout his whole career, but he was on a run there where most of his movies were good, if not great. And he was the face of
from Commando to maybe Eraser.
Yeah, there's like Raw Deal is in there, and that movie sucks. But for the most part, that's a good run of movies. I guess Last Action Hero was before Eraser. Even that movie's better than it gets credit for. It's more interesting than it gets credit for.
It's fine. It just bombed.
Yeah, like he was the male power fantasy. So
for America
in particular, which is unusual. But like, what are you going to do? So which leads to one of the greatest things about Total Recall. Is this movie sincere or ironic? Is this movie real or all in his head?
And in fact, that's the last line of dialogue in the movie.
What if this is all a dream?
Because he goes in. For this. He paid for this. He describes this, but as it turns out, he was actually a spy. Or maybe this is just part of the fantasy that they've implanted.
There's this great bit about 2/3 of the way through the movie where everything's fucking going on. There's a bunch of revolution going on. And then a guy just knocks on his door and says, "Hey, I'm an implant from Recall. You've had an embolism, and now you're trapped in the fantasy that you created for yourself. And here's your wife. We've managed to input her in here too. She really wants you to come back to her. I know this fantasy is very alluring, but this is all bullshit. Have you noticed how this entire storyline is based off of absurd coincidence, and how none of this makes any sense,
and exactly what you said is happening?
It's like, no, the girl I'm in love with is real. I dreamed about her. She's real because you dreamed about her. Can you hear yourself? This whole movie is stupid. And then all he has to do is just take this pill. It's a red pill. Wachowskis were paying attention. Just take it out, and you'll leave this virtual reality simulation, this made up fantasy, and you'll enter the real world, and everything will be okay. And then Schwarzenegger shoots him.
Yeah.
He decides to stay.
Because he sweats.
Yeah, because no one ever saw. Maybe it was hot in that room. I don't know.
Well, but if he's a fantasy and he was like he wouldn't have that function.
But it's Arnold Schwarzenegger's fantasy. He wants to stay. He could have just made up an excuse for that. So there's two rules of thought about Total Recall. It's real, and the movie supports that, or it's all a dream, and it's actually very depressing. I interviewed Paul Verhoeven.
Okay.
Boy, is that a great thing to be able to say. I'm going to tell you, that's one of my all-time favorite. Holy shit, I got to interview Paul Verhoeven. I'm not normally big on my...
In the room or over the phone?
In the room!
Oh,
it
nice.
was cool.
Okay.
And I asked him about Total Recall, because I've had so many debates over the years on both sides. My opinion of it has changed. Initially, I thought it was all real, because I thought it was cool that way. And then someone convinced me, because there's a line in the movie, like everything in the movie could be like a coincidence, could be he asked for it because of his fantasy. There's one line that he did not put in there, where one of the workers at Recall says, blue skies on Mars, that's a new one, and it ends with blue skies on Mars. That is not his idea, that is Recall putting in the ending of the movie. That part doesn't really make sense unless it's a dream.
Okay.
But there's also a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't make sense if it is a dream, like a whole bunch of stuff he's not there for. Like the whole thing at Recall where everyone flips out because, holy shit, the memory implant isn't taking. Maybe he's really a spy. That he's not conscious for that. That's a weird thing to put in his memories. I asked Paul Verhoeven, what do you think about this? And I'm sure it was partly intentional, but surely when you were making it, you had some idea. You had to, choose. Paul Verhoeven said, I'm going to paraphrase, I'm going to have the quote in front of me, but you can read this interview at Crave Online. He said... It's literally both. It's a Schrodinger's cat movie. It's not like, I left it both ways and I just didn't pick one. It's I literally made certain the movie works both ways. So that it is simultaneously real and simultaneously fake.
Hear that, Ridley Scott?
Yeah. It's both. So whatever one you think, this isn't worth getting into a fight over, he literally wanted you to have both films.
Okay. Well,
I think that's kind of genius, actually.
Good for him, yeah. So it's open to your interpretation. I always read it as being 100% legit. Even though there are all these weird sort of attempts to make him think that he was losing his mind or that he was still within the Recall fantasy. There was that scene at the beginning where he's passed out and they're talking about how they haven't implanted his fantasy.
Exactly. My point is it works both ways.
Yeah. So unfortunately, since that happened so early in the film, it was kind of cemented in my mind for so many years. You kind of have to insert the ambivalence yourself in a lot of ways.
I don't think so. I think I was watching this with Michelle, who is, she's a writer and an illustrator. She's my wife, and in many ways, she's a better film critic than I am. She's so fucking observant. And she pointed out something I'd never thought of before, which is at the end, when he turns on the big generator, that's all a metaphor for being lobotomized. Okay. That is...
like turning his brain back on?
That is rods being inserted into the matter of the planet while he is suffocating and dying. And all the steams... and even the whole mountain kind of looks like a big brain. And it's the end of the movie. It's everything being rejected. And then the last thing after he just sort of accepts that this is all there is to it is... a fade to white. And I'm watching this, I'm like, oh my god, she's so smart. Oh my god.
This is a big lobotomy metaphor.
I never even thought of that. I figured he was lobotomized at the end because that was the white light, but I never really thought of turning on the generator because he was warned he would be lobotomized if he stayed in there too long. That's it. And I'm like, shit, good point. That's fucking genius. It really works. I love almost everything about Total Recall. In fact, I'm having trouble thinking of something I don't love about Total Recall. I think it is a masterpiece of production design and makeup. The action is incredible. There's so many images in this movie that stuck with me forever. The scene where Arnold Schwarzenegger pulls a giant metal device out of his nose.
There's a lot of really great animatronic work because if you look closely at the scene where he pulls that big thing out of his nose, that's a rubber head.
Yeah, but it's handled real well.
And there's that really famous scene where he's in disguise as a larger woman.
Yeah,
and the mask starts to short. It's like an electronic mask, and it starts to short out, and he has to pull out the ear of this machine.
And the ear is way too large. There's no way that should fit in his head.
And
then, it looks cool.
And then the whole thing opens up and he pulls off the mask.
Yeah.
And in this really cool animatronic sequence how the mask opens one chunk at a time. And if you look at that scene closely enough, not only is that mask animatronic, Arnold is also animatronic in that scene.
Yeah.
That whole thing is a big puppet.
And it's really clever.
It's the most impressive puppet in the world.
Like, because the face looks really realistic to begin with, but also because the head that he's wearing, that is being pulled off in segments, is such a distractingly awesome looking effect, you're not looking closely at his face. So you're not going to notice the subtleties of, like, he didn't blink or whatever like that. It's such a fucking great. It's so fucking cool.
And Arnold is so sort of cartoonish unto himself that you can get away with that sort of thing with a face like Arnold's.
Yeah, and there's so many great details that are, like, not really important, but they're there because they're cool. Like, there's this whole thing. Long before we had those machines at airports that, like, x-rayed you and showed, like, your outline or whatever like that, Total Recall had this, like, before you get on the subway, you have to walk past this giant x-ray machine, and you can see everyone's skeletons, like, walking by. There's a whole action sequence that takes place behind that. You didn't need to build that. That's not important. It doesn't even relate to the themes particularly, other than, like, maybe looking at what's inside you, but even that's kind of thin.
It pays off later when he's trying to sneak a gun through there.
It looks cool, though. My point is that you didn't need any of that. They made that whole thing, which was a really way more complicated visual effect back then, because it looked really cool. Total Recall was a huge hit. Was, like, one of the biggest films of the year, and it's an R-rated, disgusting, grotesquely violent,
strange ideas,
somewhat perverse in a lot of ways. There's no way if you made this movie today, it would do, like, comparable numbers.
Well, they did make the movie today. They remade Total Recall.
Exactly.
And
it sucks.
Remember when you forgot it?
That's not a good... It's not like...
It was Len Wiseman who made that one.
who is a functional filmmaker, but doesn't have, like, the big ideas that Paul Verhoeven has. Total Recall is a story of big ideas, and Len Wiseman is a filmmaker of big action. That's what he's interested in. He likes the action. He likes the aesthetic. Like, you needed someone... Hell, the Spirit Brothers probably would have done a pretty good job of it. But, like, yeah, it was a weird choice to just sort of... You would think the whole point would be to streamline it. Just to make it, like, just efficient sci-fi thriller. And instead they added a whole bunch of weird shit that has nothing to do with anything. Like this huge tunnel...
through the middle of Mars because parts...
No, not even Mars.
It's Mars. It's Earth.
Yeah, burrowing through the middle of the Earth. Why? Reasons. Why is that important? It's a thing we could do.
The plot is way straightforward. God, that remake is just so useless.
I like because what they did was they combined, because Michael Ironside plays the main bad guy. I think it's Ronnie Cox is the main bad guy. Is it Ronnie Cox?
Yeah, Ronnie Cox.
Okay, so Ronnie Cox plays the main bad guy
because he was also in RoboCop.
Yeah, and Michael Ironside plays, like, the guy who's, like, mostly on Arnold Schwarzenegger's trail, trying to kill him, hates him, and Sharon Stone plays Arnold Schwarzenegger's fake wife, or supposedly, depending on what version of the story you believe, who, as soon as his cover is blown, or her cover is blown, tries to kill him. The remake combined the Michael Ironside and Sharon Stone characters, and they're both played by Kate Beckinsale. She's having fun. That's okay. Like, that part doesn't bother me. That's fine. But
that the wife was also a sleeper agent is hardly a novelty. The only
no, it's not a novelty. I just think it's okay.
The only real fun thing they did with the remake was they tricked you with the big reveal.
Oh, with the 2 weeks?
The 2 weeks lady.
Yeah, where there's a whole bit where they're trying to get through customs, he's under disguise.
In the original, Schwarzenegger's trying to get through customs, he's in disguise as a woman in a white coat, or a yellow coat, and the mask shorts out, and that's that cool sequence we were talking about, where he takes off the mask. In the remake, we have that same woman, not the same actress, but somebody who looks exactly the same, who walks up to customs and says, how long are you going to be there? I'm going to be there 2 weeks. Turns out the guy behind her is Colin Farrell in disguise.
Which is quite funny.
It's quite funny. Subverts your expectations if you're familiar with the original. It's a cute joke.
But it's not worth making a whole movie to get to that joke. It's not worth making a whole movie to get to that joke. That's all there is to it.
The only thing that's really notable about that remake.
It's not very simple. But Total Recall is a fucking classic, and it works on so many levels. You can appreciate it just superficially as an action movie, but once you start peeling back the layers, it's fucking brilliant.
What I appreciate about a lot of action films of the 80s and 90s, like the early 90s in particular, was there were those layers. I feel like we weren't willing to take action films at face value too much anymore. There was, like, on the one hand, stuff like Commando, which was all face value. It was all...
Yeah, there's nothing to Commando.
Super Americana, big, strong American Commando is going to kill foreigners. That's your story.
That is the story, yeah.
But then there was also this hint of, that Paul Verhoeven, a European, he's Dutch, came over here and said, well... I'm going to tell that story, but I'm also going to make fun of it simultaneously.
Yeah.
Predator was that way. Predator, by the way, is a satire. It's a satire. It's a satire.
And before you say, John McTiernan literally says so on the commentary track.
Yeah.
Listen to the commentary track. He's talking about, very explicitly, about how many of the decisions in that movie were made to make fun of masculinity. It's all in there.
Yeah.
But it also, and this is the best part about satire, satires work both ways. Is there a parody?
A good satire.
A good satire. Yeah. Well, if it's not a good satire, it's probably a parody. A parody is just, look at that thing, isn't it stupid? Satire is, we're going to do exactly what they're doing and we're going to take the piss out of it. So you can watch Scream as a satire, or you can watch it as really good slasher.
Yeah.
Predator's the same way.
Scream works both ways.
Predator is a satire of action movies while being a great action movie. Holy shit.
Here's something I found really interesting. People like to pair Predator and Alien. Like, in the comic books, Predators and Aliens started fighting each other as early as the 80s, but they eventually made a film out of it in the early 2000s. Predator v. Alien. These things were...
Alien v. Predator,
just these two creatures were destined to fight in cinema somehow. And if you look at the originals, Predator is a satire about a bunch of really burly dudes who are taken down by this creature. And when it takes off its mask, it has this really kind of crab-like, almost vaginal face.
Yeah, the opening of its face is very vaginal, yeah.
And you look at Alien, it's about a strong woman whose friends are all picked off by a creature that looks like a penis.
But there's vaginal imagery in there too, with the face hugger. It's a lot of the sexual imagery is inflected, involved in both of those films.
Just if you take the two together, it's interesting to see sort of their gender dynamic kind of butting heads.
Well, it makes it feel kind of natural. Like sometimes I find out like people are like, oh, you want to see those two characters fight? Why? Like I don't understand why.
Some kind of strange symbolic logic to the penis monster and the vagina monster.
Like it makes sense that Freddy would fight Jason, not like in regards to their powers.
That makes perfect sense.
No, it does actually, because it has nothing to do with their powers, because like Freddy's in dreams and Jason is quote unquote in reality. But like Freddy was a child murderer and Jason was a child who was murdered.
Murdered child, yeah.
Or well, I mean not through negligence, but still. But still. That makes sense. You can actually, and true to the form, the Freddy vs. Jason movie, which is really quite good. I like
in the Freddy v. Jason movie, the stoner, like he takes a hit, is like, man, one of them died by fire and the other one died by water. And they look at him as like, so what? I don't know. I just thought that was cool. It's like this weird stoner observation that doesn't amount to anything.
I honestly remember the stoner not being the one to bring that up.
That was the stoner. He brought that up.
I thought it was the heroine who brought that up, sort of like sleepy on a couch, but whatever. Anyway.
Oh, maybe so.
But yeah, so listen, Total Recall and John Carter, actually a really good double feature together. I recommend watching them in John Carter, then Total Recall, to see like the sincere version, and then It's Been Long Enough, We're Taking the Piss Out of This, but you can kind of have it both ways version.
Yeah.
I like John Carter. I appreciate that it has significant flaws, but I still think it mostly works. And Total Recall is one of my favorite movies, period. Period.
I of course, prefer Total Recall vastly to something like John Carter, which is A mess, B, too sincere. Having been raised
Sincerity
with these...
doesn't bother me.
Well, having been raised in an era when everything was constantly having the piss taken out of it, I was waiting for a reinvention. I was waiting for a new type of action film to replace it. And instead we just went back to the old thing and made it extra sincere. It's like, well, I can't take it seriously now. You let the cat out of the bag.
Well, what about something like Valerian that you and I both loved? That's super sincere, and that's not... I mean, it's visually inventive, but the narrative is actually pretty straightforward.
I suppose so, but it is kind of about malfeasance. It's about something.
It is about
John Carter is about too much. Like, it doesn't stick to one theme.
Well, it's about older.
It's the same
themes.
problem with Winchester. You know, there's an interesting theme hidden in there, but we're not going to explore it in any sort of significant way.
John Carter's themes are post-Civil War themes. And they were when they were written. It's kind of not where we're at right now.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really connect in a way that even something like Valerian does, which is basically about like false flag incidents and stuff like that, which feel more topical and feel more relevant to today. Valerian almost won the poll. And I think too many of you had heard our episode where we talked about how much we loved Valerian.
So you want to just hear us talk more about how much we love Valerian.
Yeah. By the way, Valerian's great. It's got some.
Golly!
It's got a couple of lame things in it. I think Dane DeHaan is a bit miscast. Whatever. It's fucking great.
I rewatched it. He's not as bad as you think.
I still think they needed a different vibe, but yeah, he's fine. It's just not perfect.
I think
it's like
Dane
Batman
DeHaan,
Begins feeling like Katie Holmes is a bit like not in the right cast. Like she's a good actor, but she doesn't quite play off of Christian Bale the way you want her to.
I think
and like
Dane DeHaan's chemistry with Cara Delevingne, I think, is fine. I think he's not as badly miscast as Taylor Kitsch is and John Carter. Because he's Valerian is not the one carrying his movie. It's Valerian and Laura Lane, and they kind of have a dynamic. And anyway, I could go
actually,
on
you know what I could
Valerian,
see. You know what I could see? Switch them.
Taylor Kitsch is Valerian.
Taylor Kitsch is Valerian, and Dane DeHaan is John Carter. Imagine someone who is actually, just kind of gangly. Playing John Carter, going to Mars and actually having all those powers. Totally changes the dynamic because he's already like a badass we see at the beginning of John Carter. It's kind of obvious, but they didn't do it, so maybe it's not that obvious. I don't know. I think Taylor Kitsch would have been just fine, but whatever. So that is it. That is Critically Acclaimed's double feature. Next week, it's going to be an episode in time for Valentine's Day. Aww. So all of our options for your poll, which is currently available on Facebook, although this poll has been available quite a bit longer than the podcast has. Sorry it was late. I was out of town. But your options are, and it's probably still available for voting unless it's like a huge runaway and it's too late, but I digress. Your options are Ed Wood's Bride of the Monster. Very romantic.
A wedding story.
Julie and Jack, a romantic comedy from the director of, or at least a romantic drama, from the director of Birdemic.
Before he made Birdemic.
Yeah, this is his first film. Co-stars Tippi Hedren from The Birds. What?
Who's also credited in Birdemic. So I guess they were good pals.
Winter's Tale. Starring Colin Farrell as a guy who gets headbutted repeatedly into amnesia by Russell Crowe. That movie is insane.
It's a documentary.
Also, the musical Xanadu from 1980, starring Olivia Newton-John and
Michael Beck.
Michael Beck. I was trying to remember his name from The Warriors, but all I could think of was Ajax, but that was James Remar. And finally, because we keep getting requests for this, really passionate requests, your option is Yeti, a Love Story. I don't actually know anything about Yeti, a Love Story. I'm trying to stay blind.
A lot of people have been recommending Yeti, a Love Story. People have been coming to us on Twitter. Hey, have you seen Yeti, a Love Story yet?
Not yet, damn it.
We have not seen Yeti, a Love Story,
Maybe
but if you vote for it, we will.
Maybe. And those are your options. Also, next week, we're going to be reviewing the new 50 Shades movie, as well as all of the Oscar-nominated short films.
So that's 15 movies right there.
That's 15 short movies, but we're going to try to give them their due because they're really interesting and they don't get enough credit. Not enough people can see them. They will be playing in theaters throughout the country, select theaters, but throughout the country next week. And I always recommend checking them out. There's a lot of interesting filmmaking that goes completely under the radar because, with the exception of like the Pixar short that played in front of Cars 3, most people haven't seen any of them.
Yeah.
So there you go. We're also going to take a little bit of time to answer some letters.
Okay.
You can email us, criticallyacclaimedfans@gmail.com. We try to read as many as we can, but we get a lot, and we thank everyone for emailing us. I guess away we go. What do we got?
Let's see here. Let's find the oldest letter I haven't read yet. This one is from Michael.
Okay.
Hello, Will Witt. I'm really sorry.
I've been called worse.
Yep, that's both of us. My question is about love for a certain type of movie premise. For me, I will see and usually love any movie that happens in the premise of family friends reunite because of insert occasion.
Okay.
Some examples of this are The Big Chill, The Family Stone, Dan in Real Life, Grosse Point Blank, and so on. I was wondering if what are some of your favorites featuring this type of premise, and can you recommend any? Also, do you have any love for certain premises of your own for whatever reason? Thank you for being yourselves. Continue to echo with laughter. Does anybody remember it? Michael.
My favorite type of movie that I have a soft spot for anyone who tries this, and it usually works out good, is what my dad would call the poor bastard genre. That's any genre in which the protagonist tries to succeed and the world just dumps on them. There are times.
Have you seen He Who Gets Slapped?
No.
The Lon Chaney film from 1919 or something?
No, that sounds amazing. It's tricky though because there is a way to do it wrong. I think Meet the Parents is very mean about it because here's someone who's just trying to do the right thing and then everyone just hurts him and he hurts other people. It's an ugly. I know why it's a hit. I find it unpleasant. But you compare it to something like Quick Change, It's a great Poor Bastard movie.
Well, it's a Poor Bastard movie that you can kind of get behind because the protagonists are thieves.
They're bank robbers, so it works. So that movie is Bill Murray, Gina Davis, and Randy Quaid have just robbed a bank. Very successfully robbed the bank. The bank heist goes off without a hitch. Problem is, getting out of town is impossible.
They get lost.
They get mugged.
They can't find a car that works. They get on the wrong expressway. They can't get on the plane. Whatever it is, they just can't.
There's a great bit where they finally just get on a bus. Fuck it, but they don't have exact change, and the bus will only wait for like 90 seconds, and he's got to go into like a gas station, and some old lady is there, and she's taking way too long in front of him, and just the suspense is insane. Another good version of this is just look at something like the Evil Dead movies. Like Evil Dead 2 is just basically how much can Bruce Campbell's life suck?
One bad day.
Yeah, like the one bad day genre. My dream, if I ever got to make like a Spider-Man movie, because those are my favorite Spider-Man comics, the one bad day Spider-Man comics, where everything goes wrong.
That's something I really loved about Spider-Man 2. First of all, I love everything about Spider-Man 2. That's one of the best of all superhero movies. But any of the other Spider-Man movies, toss them out. Spider-Man 2 is the one. There's a scene in that movie early on where he has to wash his Spider-Man costume.
Yeah.
And it stains his clothes.
Yeah.
Because it's a bright red, bright blue thing.
Everything
makes all his clothes purple.
Spider-Man 2 is a Poor Bastard movie. Totally. It has a happier ending than many of them. Like, you look at Martin Scorsese's After Hours, that movie's depressing. But it is a Poor Bastard movie. But yeah, it's just how bad can we make Spider-Man's life? One of the things that made Spider-Man great was that he was the one who exploded the idea. He exploded the power fantasy more than any other comic book character. It was basically like, what if being superheroes sucked in every conceivable way? Everything about it sucks.
There was an issue of Spider-Man in the early 70s where he went to therapy. And I think that was the first time that had ever happened in a superhero comic.
Yeah.
Where, like, he's in the costume laying on a couch and therapist's looking at him like, I think I know what your first problem is. First of all, you're dressed as a friggin' spider. That's kind of an obvious thing.
What about you?
Oh, golly, I'm trying to think of, like, something I'll always be a sucker for. I'm very keen on stories, like, about sanity. Like, where stories where people have to prove whether or not they're sane, and you start to question sort of reality and sort of the perspective of it all. One of the films that really kind of exploded my brain when I was 16 or so was In the Mouth of Madness, about how these, like, the world is falling so out of joint that the sane and the insane are essentially switching places.
Right.
That was something that was really appealing to me. There's Soderbergh's next film, Unsane, looks really, really cool, about a woman who has a stalker and she goes into, tries to get restraining orders and it's not working and she goes to see a doctor and the doctors end up restraining her and then they tell her that her stalker is just in her head. And now she has to prove whether or not she's sane or not. That was one of the more appealing things about rather awful A Cure for Wellness. About, how much of this is real, how much of this is hallucination, and does it really matter after a while? You ever see The Ninth Configuration? Boy, howdy.
That's a great movie.
Boy, howdy.
I love that movie. It ends kind of weird, but yeah, it's a great movie. But, yeah.
Shutter Island was another one of those.
Sure.
I like premises like that. Those aren't necessarily my favorite movies, but I'll always be kind of a little bit more instantly engaged when I see a film like that.
Let's read another letter.
Okay. Another letter. This one comes from Will. Hello, Will. Hello, gentlemen. I have a bit of an odd question for you. How do you jumpstart a Teddy Ruxpin with a car battery?
That's a fair question. The important thing is
that was my.
Oh, yours a joke. Okay.
Question. What would you consider the quintessential American dream film? I just recently watched Rudy for the first time, much to the surprise of many of my friends, all of whom consider it to be an American classic. These are the same people who are saying that Rocky is the film that represents the American heart at its core. I'm not sure I agree, considering both films are about white lower middle class men wanting to do well at sports. Apologies for the crude generalization for two great films.
It's apt.
No, it's fine.
They're good movies. But,
what would you qualify as perfect encapsulation of the American dream? The closest I can come up with is The Godfather, Parts 1 and 2, which is essentially an immigrant story, which does seem to be timely right now. Love to hear your thoughts. Many thanks. One that I've been thinking about an awful lot in recent years is Martin Scorsese's The Wolf of Wall Street, about how And that is, of course, about the corruption of the American dream. But it is about how somebody starts out poor and they become so wealthy that they achieve the American dream, which is just to be well off. But what The Wolf of Wall Street does is show what the actual ends of that wealth is supposed to be. Not just to be wealthy, but to achieve enough wealth that you can essentially ignore all basic sense of law and morality, that you can become so wealthy that the rules of goodness and badness no longer apply. You can do whatever crazy shit you want, and money can buy you out of it. And this has been seen in other films before, but it really hit home with me with The Wolf of Wall Street.
Fair enough. I find
where it really kind of exploded what the point of the American dream is, and the point of the American dream is to be an immoral bastard.
Well, for me, okay, there's two things I feel about. There's a cynical way of looking at the American dream, and there's sort of an optimistic way of looking at the American dream, and I think both takes are equally valid, so I'll give you one pick for each. The cynical version, and I don't care if it's a cliche, still think it's great, Citizen Kane.
Oh, there you
Citizen Kane starts out with a child who has nothing, gains everything, and is unhappy with it. And it makes him empty. That's a huge simplification of the storyline, but when it comes right down to it, it's a satire of one of the most richest and most powerful men in America, William Randolph Hearst, and it's a big accusation of the kind of sort of negative... Like negative space human being you become when you define yourself by accomplishment and money. It's brilliant for a million reasons. You can find out all of them very, very easily. But the other one I want to talk about is when I think about the positive ideas of the American dream, it's almost impossible for me to sort of remove that from the immigrant experience. The idea that America represents something. But a lot of those movies about the immigrant experience are, they're difficult. Some of them are overly sugar-coated, and even The Godfather is, kind of tricky in that regard. It's, he succeeds, but he sees it becoming an evil, he becomes a criminal.
An evil criminal.
Responsible for a lot of people dying, and it's tricky. For me, I'm going to go with An American Tail.
Oh, the Russian mouse.
Yeah, the Russian mouse who comes to America, gets separated from his family, and discovers a lot of good and a lot of really bad things. That's a very evenly divided movie. There's a lot of hope, there's a lot of love, there's a lot of beauty, and there's a lot of cynicism and racism and a lot of xenophobia in it. And it really confronts those issues in a way that everyone can appreciate and everyone can feel it was taken very seriously. It's a movie that doesn't get a lot of play anymore. I think everyone who remembers it well.
It was talked about for a good number of years, and then Don Bluth has just sort of fallen off the radar.
And with the Secret of Nim, I think is rightfully and will always be considered a classic. But a lot of like the sort of other than that, like Don Bluth's films are not penetrating anymore. Last time I was in a store that had a copy of American Tail, like on DVD. The cover was just Fievel's face smiling, huge, just whee! And I'm like, you're not selling that. That's any mouse cartoon. That's not American Tail. Really needs to be rediscovered.
You kind of really have to know what that is.
Yeah.
Well, it came out with a sequel. Don Bluth hasn't been as active in recent years.
There are 3 sequels to American Tail.
Oh golly!
I think 2 of them went straight to video.
Okay,
but like
there was one theatrical release. Yeah, at the very least.
Yeah, Fievel Goes West, which you and I both forgot enough that we
blew a Schmodown question.
We would have won if we remembered
that question. That Jimmy Stewart was in Fievel Goes West. Silly us. I find it kind of odd that when you look back, Citizen Kane notwithstanding, but when you look back at sort of the more quintessentially American movies, and you have to go back to like the 30s and 40s for this, they're all made by immigrants. Frank Capra is Italian.
Oh, yeah.
Frank Capra is one of the greatest of all American directors, and he's Italian.
Yeah.
He made Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He made You Can't Take It With You. He made Lost Horizon. He made great film after great film, all about the positivity and the optimism of the American experience. I mean, It's a Wonderful Life, for goodness sake. And I find that his view and optimism about America speaks most loudly to the American dream because he's lived it.
He's kind of the opposite of Paul Verhoeven.
Yeah.
He looks at America and he sees all the good stuff. He sees the bad stuff too, but he sees the good stuff overcoming it.
Being able to easily overcome it eventually. Like Claude Rains charging in the end of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. No, he was right.
That's the fantasy of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. That's it. That the bad people can feel remorse. That's something that I fantasize about. It's just like, oh God, what if like just one person who's like
I am ashamed to have done this.
I'm sorry about this tax bill or whatever. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Something. Anyway, We just don't have it anymore.
Let's go to another letter.
Let's do another letter.
All right. Here's one from Kevin.
Okay.
Hello, Kevin.
Hi.
Hey, Bibbs and Whitney. After listening to you talk about the nature of adapting books into movies on the last podcast, I thought I'd turn the subject and ask your thoughts on novelizations. When I was younger, I read the junior novelization of Pokemon the First Movie and other such books.
That's awesome.
Because I was a voracious reader and I couldn't wait for the movies.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a kid, I read the novelization of Little Monsters.
Oh, my God.
The Fred Savage film. So, yeah I'm there with you, Kevin. That seems to be the primary audience for them, and the writing for them is for the most part, rudimentary, although you can sometimes sense the author sneaking in a bit of fun. The novelization of Spider-Man 2, for instance, Hank Pym is among the scientists who witnessed the disaster.
Yeah.
All right. Occasionally, though, you'll get something like the upcoming novelization of The Shape of Water, which was written by Daniel Krauss with close collaboration with Guillermo del Toro, and is meant to be a meaningful work of literature in its own right. Have you ever read novelizations? What do you think of the process of adapting films to books as opposed to the other way around? Are there movies that you think would be made into a great novel? Thanks to the podcasting. Your discussion of Orca was delightful to listen to.
Thank you,
Kevin.
That's actually a fun one. People have been talking a little bit more about this lately, and I'm not sure why, but I'm glad they are. There was a time when a novelization of a movie was kind of the way you could have the movie. Like, you can get the soundtrack, you can get the novelization. Home video was maybe available, but it was really expensive to buy VHSs for a really long time.
You had to get the rental grade materials.
And you had to wait for them as well,
Yeah.
so you could get the novelization. And I read a bunch of novelizations. I read the novelization of Terminator 2, which had a whole bunch of extra stuff in the future, which was really cool. You got to remember that in order to get a novelization out in time for the movie to come out, the novelist, most of whom are just working for hire, and most people aren't passionate about it, have to crank it out real fast. And oftentimes they get a head start by using an earlier draft of the screenplay, which has a bunch of stuff that didn't end up in the movie.
So it'll be a little different.
So, for example, the novelization of Gremlins is one of the more notorious examples, because in the novelization of Gremlins, it turns out the Gremlins are aliens.
Yep, they're from space.
They were invented by a scientist in space.
Yeah.
They were a failed experiment. They ended up on Earth. And you're reading the book and you're going, the fuck?
The one I read most recently, I read the novelization of Warlock, written by Ray Garton, the Julian Sands horror movie.
Nice.
And he did make one distinct change. The story's pretty much the same. The character's the same.
Yeah.
The Richard E. Grant character in the book is actually like a lumbering red-haired giant.
Yeah.
Now, like this big bold warrior type. And also the Warlock has like a 3-foot-long penis. I'm not kidding. And that's a kind of a strange detail.
It's an interesting thing to add.
We had on the podcast David Bergantino,
who wrote our favorite movie novelization ever.
He did the novelization of Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Now, if you haven't seen Wes Craven's New Nightmare, it's about how the actors from the original film, A Nightmare on Elm Street, are now being stalked by Freddy in real life.
Yeah, the idea of the Freddy represented a sort of idea of evil, like sort of like the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, or
an ancient,
the boogeyman,
an ancient demon that can be captured in like fictional forms, fictional images.
If you tell stories about how scary it is, it gets captured. If you forget how scary it is and you no longer respect that evil, it breaks out and kills you.
That's what happened, and that's a really cool idea that Wes Craven had to bring Freddy back. And because it's about this like fictional thing breaking into the real world, the novelization begins from the perspective of the author who is novelizing the screenplay and how Freddy is starting to stalk him. So it's this extra layer of narrative within the novelization that enriches the story.
Which is pretty cool. That's a fun one.
Wouldn't it be great to have a movie of that novelization of New Nightmare? Like you put in footage from New Nightmare, but it's mostly about David Bergantino.
I feel like that would be like I'm Madman. Or The Dark Half.
It'd be like
it's been done.
Adaptation, but yeah.
There's a really great horror movie from the 80s called I, Madman, which is about a evil monster that's trapped in a book, and a woman starts reading it again, and the monster comes out and starts killing people, and it's really cool, actually.
There's kind of a camp appeal to movie novelizations, especially when the movie doesn't necessarily lend itself to high literature. Like there's novelizations of stuff like Mars Attacks. I have the novelization of Johnny Mnemonic in my apartment, and Virtuosity, and the Ang Lee version of the Hulk,
right,
where the novel was written by Peter David. So there's kind of an absurd kitschy appeal to having a lot of these movie novelizations. only occasionally will that happen in sort of where it starts to tilt toward actual literature. And I'm thinking of 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the screenplay and the book were kind of written in tandem.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't like one after the other like we usually have.
Yeah.
There's also occasionally, like, there was Dean Koontz wrote the novelization of Funhouse. And I think it came out...
Toby Hooper movie.
Yeah, and I think it came out before Funhouse. A lot of people thought Funhouse was an adaptation of the Dean Koontz book. So, weird little unusual synergy there. So there's like a whole history there, and it's kind of fun.
There's also the really odd phenomenon of something that's adapted from a book and then gets adapted back into a novelization.
Oh my god, that's insane. I saw...
here's the novelization of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
That's a real thing.
Somebody did a novel of the screenplay of Dracula. Dracula's a book.
And
just
I think it's
Dracula.
a public domain.
It's a public. Just go to a library.
It's absolutely nuts. There was one. They did a novelization of Road to Perdition, which is based on a graphic novel, which is not even an expensive graphic novel. It's not even that big. Like, you can just get the graphic novel. It's a good graphic novel. Like, it's absurd to me.
Do you like comics but not pictures?
So bizarre. Let's read another one. Here's one from Sci-Fi AJ.
Okay.
Hi, guys. I really enjoy your show. It has introduced me to movies I never would have watched before and helped me broaden my horizons a ton, and I'm super thankful for that. Thank you. That's why we're here. I recently started watching silent films, starting with City Lights and Destiny. I have copies of Metropolis, Nosferatu, and Phantom of the Opera on hand, so they'll be up next from me. Outside of these, are there any other silent films you would recommend or would consider must-sees? Thanks again for all you guys do. I really appreciate it. First off, you're off to a great start. Those are great picks.
City Lights is a good one to start with.
City Lights is going to start with Metropolis. This was sent a little while ago, so you might have burned through those already. Metropolis, Nosferatu, Phantom of the Opera, all great. I'm a huge fan of Buster Keaton, which
I was about to say, if you haven't gone to Buster Keaton, there's a debate among cinephiles.
Yeah, who is better?
Who is superior between Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton? The answer is Buster Keaton.
If I have to pick, it's Buster Keaton. But why not both?
If you're French, the answer is Charlie Chaplin.
Seriously, they're both brilliant filmmakers.
Yeah. And Harold Lloyd should not be third in this conversation, but he always is.
Harold Lloyd just didn't make as many films that still pop today. His most famous film is Safety Last, which ends with one of the greatest sequences in movie history.
Where he climbs the building.
He's free climbing a skyscraper in New York City.
In a suit.
and it's death-defying. It's insane. For a long time, people didn't know how they did it. It was such a good special effect. And the problem was the rest of the movie is just okay. The rest of the movie is just a build up to that, and it's just okay. Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin built all of his movies around emotion, like at least the long ones anyway, and so they were very sort of impactful, very sentimental a lot of the time. Buster Keaton built his stuff around sort of Rube Goldberg comedy devices, where he would set things up and he'd pay them off again and again and again. And the ultimate example of this is The General. Which is about a steam engine chase.
Yep.
Which is kind of hard to picture in the first place. You look at something like, The Lone Ranger tried to pull it off, and it just became kind of interminable. Buster Keaton did it for a whole film, and he never ran out of material. And some of the stuff...
And he actually had to time this out and run the steam trains. And, there's a stunt he does where there's a log on the tracks of the train.
Yeah.
And he is standing on the front of the train with a log, and he throws the one log he's holding at the other to knock it off the tracks just in time for the train to go by. If he missed, that train would have derailed.
Yeah. It's insane. Buster, you didn't have to do that. It's okay, Buster, but he did, and it's fucking incredible. Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd are two of the big influences on Jackie Chan, who also insisted on, to his credit, doing his own stunts.
Right.
Didn't ask anyone to do anything he wouldn't do himself. Good for him. Buster Keaton's a great place to start. I recommend The General, Sherlock Jr., and Our Hospitality would be my three favorites.
Yeah, the General for sure.
What else?
If you haven't seen it yet, it won Best Picture. Watch Wings.
Oh yeah,
Wings is terrific.
Yeah.
A lot of people, only people who are sort of interested in Academy Awards history tend to go back and watch Wings, but you can see Scorsese all over Wings.
Oh yeah, Wings was a huge influence on The Last Jedi.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, they actually, in terms of all the sequences on Canto Bight, Rian Johnson said he was inspired by a lot of the way they filmed Wings.
Yeah,
and Wings is an Air Force World War I movie, right?
Yeah. Couldn't be World War II yet, hadn't happened yet.
People forget that although Wings is officially the first Best Picture winner, the first year of the Academy Awards, they kind of divided up to use a very tired and I don't like it film geek expression, movies and films.
Yeah,
there was the best
there's-
mainstream kind of crowd-pleasing movie, which was Wings.
So the other best picture is also worth seeing, and that's Murnau's Sunrise.
Yeah, Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, which is it's interesting. It starts off very bleak. It's about a husband who's having an affair and plots to kill his wife, and then realizes that he loves his wife, and they end up having a wonderful time.
And
it's a weird film.
And he ends up, at the very end of the film, rejecting his mistress. And that's the movie, about sort of how this man regains his soul, his wife, who's typically powerless to stop him, who is just happy to see him sort of become a human again, and how they can become humans together. It's really a beautiful movie. If you haven't seen Broken Blossoms, Griffith's Broken Blossoms, that one's really great.
I highly recommend Murnau's The Last Laugh, which is one of the most emotional movies I've ever seen in my life. It is about a man who is... he's the doorman at a fancy hotel, and in his incredibly impoverished neighborhood, he gets to wear a nice suit. He is a symbol of everything people aspire to, and he's too old to do it well anymore. And so he gets sent to the bathroom, and it totally destroys his identity. And he becomes a bathroom attendant, and even that, he can't do very well anymore. And it's all about dying in humiliation and shame. And then, to prove that the Hollywood studio system was even in expressionist Germany, the producers were just like, that's really bleak. Can you give this a happy ending? Wait till you see Murnau's solution. It's insane. Holy shit. I actually think it's kind of brilliant. I actually like what it does to the movie, but what are you going to do?
Murnau is a brilliant filmmaker. Golly, trying to think of other just great. There's so many. I mean, it's decades of cinema that you can go through.
You go to the original Zorro, the first superhero movie, The Mark of Zorro.
I haven't seen The Mark of Zorro,
which is great. Douglas Fairbanks Sr. Yeah, people don't lump Zorro in with superheroes. I don't know why. He's a guy with a secret identity and a mask who fights bad guys. He's basically Batman. There's a reason why almost every version of Batman he went to see a Zorro movie. So that one's great. I recommend all the Lon Chaney Sr. stuff besides Phantom of the Opera. You should check out The Unknown, which is a really ghoulish Tales from the Crypt kind of movie.
Todd Browning, before his Dracula days, made a really terrific film called The Unholy Three.
Yes.
Where Lon Chaney plays Lon Chaney, a giant and a dwarf from a circus, all team up to stage a heist. The giant is just a giant. The dwarf poses as an infant, so he's in the baby clothes and in the cradle, but he's also like holding guns and stuff. And Lon Chaney poses as an old lady, and it's amazing.
You know, we haven't mentioned Georges Méliès yet.
Oh, that's
Georges
true.
Méliès, who basically invented the idea of visual effects as we know them. He created the first visual effects blockbusters. Most people have seen at least bits of his A Trip to the Moon, which also invented a lot of sci-fi tropes, not unlike John Carter. That's worth checking down, but he mostly made like really short films, so like you can really just see them real fast. And a lot of them are available on YouTube and stuff like that.
I think a lot of I think Netflix, in fact, has like a Méliès.
I think they used to have A Trip to the Moon. I know that. There's A Man with a Movie Camera, which is one of the most experimental movies ever made. There's no narrative. The narrative is the juxtaposition of images. It's kind of weird.
It was voted one of the best films of all time on one of the last Sight and Sound polls, and every 10 years, Sight and Sound does a poll of famous critics and filmmakers.
To be included is every critic's dream.
That's our goal, is to be polled in the Sight and Sound
poll. I'll know I've made it.
But every 10 years, they come out with their list of what the best films of all time. For 50 years, it was Citizen Kane. Just this last poll, which came out in 2012, Vertigo supplanted it, and Man with a Movie Camera was on that list. And I have trouble arguing that it's not one of the best films of all time, because it reveals what cinema is in just sort of the way it uses camera and the way it observes and the way it sort of looks at truth.
I have a correction to make. It was Douglas Fairbanks who was in Mark of Zorro.
Oh, who did you say? Did you say Errol Flynn?
No, I thought I put... didn't I say Douglas Fairbanks?
You said Douglas Fairbanks.
Oh, my apologies. I thought I got that wrong. Anyway, I'm a fool.
What are some other... I really fell in love with... a lot of old silent films take a lot of patience. Von Stroheim's Greed is 4 hours.
Yeah.
And I've seen it, and I like von Stroheim's Greed a lot, and you will end by repeatedly ripping your heart out. There is a 5-hour rendition that Fritz Lang did of the Nibelungen.
Yes.
Which which feels like classic literature. Like, it starts out with these sort of bold, adventurous tropes of heroes going, like, questing to find shields and swords, and there's a battle with a dragon. They built a life-size dragon. It's
a cool-looking dragon.
It's a cool-looking dragon.
Yeah.
And as the film goes on, it's 5 hours long, he becomes king, and then he loses his kingdom, and then two kingdoms start to go to war, and you see everything breaking down. That humanity inserts themselves into the magic and essentially trods all over it. And watching this over the course of 5 hours, this slow breakdown of magic into dull, trite, violent humanity is just a marvel to behold.
It's interesting when you look at silent film, you can see the birth of visual dynamism. And again, they didn't have sound to work with. So there's a lot of like really exciting imagery that to this day still feels really exciting and dynamic. A couple of examples of this, Battleship Potemkin, which invented a lot of the ideas we currently have about editing. There was a time when you edited as little as possible. There was a time when editing was very direct, just cut from one scene to another. Battleship Potemkin was doing parallel editing and metaphoric editing, and it kind of like all the editing that isn't super rudimentary kind of started with Battleship Potemkin. If you want to think about it, another example: The Passion of Joan of Arc, which is a very excitingly made motion picture. Another very depressing one, but just look at the way it's filmed.
Passion of Joan of Arc.
Yeah, exactly. It's incredible.
It's got my favorite Maria Falconetti performance. That's a joke because she was only in one movie.
Get it? Let's see. Oh, The Lodger, Hitchcock's first big hit.
I haven't seen The Lodger.
Oh, it's great.
I actually haven't seen any of Hitchcock's silent movies.
That's the only one that's like readily available, and it's really good. It's basically Hitchcock's take on Jack the Ripper. There's someone out there. There's a serial killer stalking the streets of London, and it's about like the people at a hotel or motel or apartment. I'm trying to remember exactly, and they think one of their lodgers is the killer, and it's really great. It's a great movie. They remade it in sound, and that version's also great. It's just a solid setup. So anyway, hopefully that's some stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and of course, Un Chien Andalou. If you haven't seen Un Chien Andalou,
aka an Andalusian dog.
An Andalusian dog, usually referred to as French title. That's Luis Buñuel and Salvador Dali.
Yeah.
Attempting to destroy art.
Yeah.
They wanted to, like, Buñuel actually, he's, in a famous story, put rocks in his pockets at the premiere because he assumed people were going to riot and he needed something to fight back with. And when they didn't, he was a little upset.
One more. Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, considered by many to be the first proper horror movie. And it's hard to dispute. It's also the birth of what we call German Expressionism.
If you liked sort of the long shadows and weird angles of Nosferatu, it started with Caligari.
Yeah, it's very much just trying to interpret dreams. A lot of these sets were literally painted. And it's gorgeous, and it also
has a good Tales from the Crypt type twist at the end.
Yeah, actually, it kind of invented the motion picture twist. There really didn't exist before that. So this was like the first time anyone pulled the rug out of the audience, and that was also from a studio note. It was too dark. And ironically, I think they made it darker. But what are you gonna do?
The ending is still plenty dark.
Yeah. So anyway, hopefully that gives you some stuff to work with.
There's so many more, but we just dumped a big pile on this. So let's hope you can work with that a little bit.
To Sci-Fi AJ and everyone listening, it's people sort of. It's the natural arc of history, stuff that it gets older and older and older, gets filtered out of the conversation somewhat naturally, and fewer things, become popular. You want to look at any list of the best movies ever made written in the 50s. And think about how many films you've never seen or heard of. Look at any books of the greatest novels of the century written in the 50s. Think about how few of them are actually still popular. These things get filtered down, but it's our job as critics, and I love this is my favorite part of the job, to try to keep the best ones alive as long as possible so that new people can find them and be inspired by them. So if like a lot of people, you're not terribly well versed in silent cinema, and even I'm not as well versed as I'd like to be, watch some of those movies. Yeah. Seriously, there's some incredible motion pictures. It might take you a little doing to sort of get used to the different cinematic language that was used at the time, but once you can, I think you're really going to love a lot of them. There's some really amazing stuff out there.
Here's the hint. Start with Laurel and Hardy. Because they're going to be funny no matter what.
I was going to say start with Buster Keaton.
Or Buster
Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. Start with the comedies.
Yeah.
Comedy tracks.
They're going to be a little bit more accessible. And Laurel and Hardy I say Laurel and Hardy because they made only short film. Like, they only made a few features.
Yeah.
But yeah, their short films are so perfectly timed and so familiar. Like, if you've ever seen any cartoon, you've seen Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah.
So you're going to recognize it, but you're still going to laugh because it's still timed out so perfectly well.
All right, let's do one last letter and then we'll go.
One last letter. Let me call one up here. Here is a letter from John.
Okay.
Sorry, I like to look at the name at the bottom rather than the
that's how people like to be credited.
Hi, Bibbs and Witney. Love the show. Discovered you since you joined the Schmoes feed, and it's been fun and informative. Thank you for listening.
Yay.
Last week you discussed the idea of books to film adaptations. This is another one on that. In my opinion, Lord of the Rings is a masterclass in faithfully adapting a novel. The Hobbit films suffer considerable bloat that obscure some of the great elements of the book. As a result, I searched for a fan edit that excises the excess without the film becoming incoherent. I had a similarly good experience with some Star Wars prequel trilogy edits. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, fan edits can redeem a mediocre film that has some great ideas hidden beneath poor execution. But I know there are people who consider modifying a film post-release as vandalism, tantamount to spray painting on the Mona Lisa. Do you have any opinions on or experience with fan edits? Is it okay to modify a film, or should we just tolerate the things we don't like? Could this also be applied to director's cuts? Thank you for my question. Oh, erudite ones, John.
Fan edits are different than director's cuts, because the director isn't actually the filmmaker going back and trying to say, here's what I meant, or at the very least, it's their work of art, so I don't mind them taking another pass at it. The problem
it gets annoying when, like, Friedkin or Ridley Scott just starts mucking with something that's fine.
Yeah,
or they can't find a final version, so they keep releasing cut after cut of Blade Runner.
What pisses me off more than anything else, especially when it's a director's cut, is when the original cut's unavailable. I think that needs to still be available. You can still totally highlight that you have the new cut, but that was the version that came out. That was the version that influenced people. And to sweep that under the rug because you like your second draft better, you should have come out with that first. I know you don't always have the choice, but
George Lucas.
I don't like taking things out of historical conversation. I don't like that. Yeah. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair to the art. I don't think it's fair to the audience. I don't think it's fair to you, the filmmaker. Fan edits are a little different because I don't think any fan edit is ever going to replace the version of it, with maybe the exception of filmmakers who try to recreate lost films. Yeah. For example,
but that's not a fan edit. That's a form of archiving.
Well, you look at something like Giorgio Moroder's Metropolis.
Oh well,
which is an interesting experiment.
Or Philip Glass's Dracula.
Yeah. So you look at. I'll explain Giorgio Moroder's Metropolis. Metropolis is a silent film we only briefly touched upon because Sci-Fi AJ said he was already watching it. But it's one of the first great sci-fi epics. It's a dystopian future. There are robots. There's insurrection. It's incredible. And for a long time, it was mostly incomplete. It's still not 100% complete, but we found a lot of it.
There's a
mostly complete version.
There's a version called The Complete Metropolis, and it has a few intertitles that describe scenes that are simply lost.
But it's mostly there, and it plays better than any other version. But there was a time in the 80s where the version you can get most easily was done by Giorgio Moroder, who is best known for his soundtracks. He did the soundtrack to something like Top Gun. And I think he's a great musician. And he had assembled what was at the time pretty much the most complete version of Metropolis. And he tinted it like crazy. He used stills that were available to put in old scenes, and he had the score from people like Queen and Pat Benatar. So it felt really pop and edgy, and that's basically a fan edit if you really want to talk about it, because he really added his own kind of spin to it.
It was studio sanctioned, but yeah,
I think that's interesting.
A reinterpretation.
I actually love that version. It's really fun, but it's not really the movie. It's his idea of the movie.
There's two things going on with fan edits. One is sort of cultural remix, which became really big as soon as people could actually do it themselves. Yep. Where you can sort of make. There are some really great companies out there like TV Carnage and Everything is Terrible that sort of cull the bottoms of pop culture to find old infomercials and strange TV commercials and strange TV shows and offensive things from the past and remix them into these long, abstract montages of just strange garbage.
Yeah.
And they're great.
Yeah. Joe Dante did something like that once with the movie.
Oh, yeah. Oh, what was that called?
What's he called?
I totally forgot. It was like Movie the Movie or Preview the Movie. Or
I'll look it up. He basically just combined bits and pieces from every like strange movie you could find.
So as soon as people had access to the type of tools that allowed them to remix, they're now kind of uncovering the ugly, naked lunch truth of what media is trying to say to you. Robbed of its context, it becomes truer somehow.
The movie orgy is what Joe Donovan's thing
That's
is called.
right, the movie orgy.
Yeah, it's a montage
I wish
of
I could have
coming attractions
seen
and
it.
stuff.
I have not seen the movie orgy, but I have seen Everything is Terrible, and I have seen TV Carnage stuff, and that stuff is great.
But when we talk about fan edits, what we're really talking about is cutting Jar Jar out of the prequels.
Well, what we're talking about is criticism. A fan edit is looking at a film and thinking, this is the film we have, and clearly it's imperfect, and by remixing it, you're essentially criticizing it, saying, here, you're showing back to the filmmaker and to the world, here's a version of it
that I would have liked,
that would have worked better in my eye.
Yeah.
It's not authority, and we can only ever accept those things as criticism.
Right.
By saying you're correcting it is just a way of saying you're criticizing it.
That's true.
And as a criticism, some of those are fine.
Some of them are better than others, that's for certain.
But you have to kind of be on the filmmaker's wavelength or accept what they're trying to do in order to really jibe with their authority on the topic. What if you like Jar Jar?
Yeah.
What if,
Well, the example everyone's talking about right now is that there is the sort of men's rights activist cut of Last Jedi, which cuts out all the women. Which is, the movie is incredibly short. It's my understanding. I haven't watched it because I have no interest, but apparently it doesn't work.
Mostly women in that movie.
Yeah, it's all the...
What, to just cut out every shot of a woman?
I don't understand.
They don't bother to reconstruct the story at all?
There's an agenda behind doing it, but you're right, it's a form of criticism. I criticize what you did. I disagree with that critique in general, but that's my point. It's not, you're not fixing it. You're just making a comment. There's a conversation ongoing forever about whether or not criticism is art, and I think all art is criticism. I think all art is looking at something and responding to it and creating either an alternate narrative in which the world is the way you want it to be, or the world is the way you think it is, or the world is the way you're afraid it's going to be. Criticism is basically art about art. Criticism is basically a conversation about art. It's very direct a lot of the time, but yeah.
Every piece of art and every art movement and every trend and every genre is a reaction to everything that came before it. And, this is what we mean when we say all art is political. It's all commenting on the atmosphere out of which it came.
The world in which we live, grew up in, are afraid of, whatever.
And some films are a lot more pointed. They're trying to aesthetically undo trends of the previous generation and, tear art down. Others are trying to reinforce it. Others are trying to recapture, they feel, that something that has been lost in the present.
Yeah.
And these fan edits are a way of saying that, A, we have the technology now, and entertainment is being a lot more democratized, which is a good or a bad thing depending on how you want to argue it. And also that critics and fans can now go right back at the filmmakers with a version of the film that they like.
Yeah.
They can feel like they're a little bit more of an active process. Now, I'm a little bit more of a purist, so when a film comes out, I consider that to be the authoritative cut. Even if another cut comes along later,
like a director's cut,
like a director's cut or something that I like a lot better, we'll have to distinguish that as a different film.
Yeah.
The first version of The Lawnmower Man
is The Lawnmower Man.
The
other one is The Lawnmower Man, the director's cut.
Is the director's cut. Makes a little bit more sense.
Still a dumb movie.
One could argue that neither's very good. I'm fond of it for dumb reasons.
But I give Ridley Scott credit. When he keeps retinkering with Blade Runner, he makes the old versions available. And partially just because, hey, look what happened. And here's the process. Isn't that interesting? It bothers me that the original...
It becomes more about the process than it does about what's in the film after a while.
I remember when Steven Spielberg decided... rather foolishly, I think, to recut E.T. So that the FBI agents had walkie-talkies instead of guns. Steven, no one gave a shit. I'm going to tell you right now, no one cared. I don't know what you thought you were doing. It was really just didn't help. He added a couple other scenes into the movie, but when he put the movie out on Blu-ray at the time, or DVD or whatever it was, both versions were there. That's fine.
You could choose which version.
Yeah, keep playing with it if you want, and eventually we might decide we like one version better, and that will become the definitive version. But it's hard to find the quote unquote, I think it's director's cut of The Warriors, which adds an unnecessary intro like voiceover and has a whole bunch of Tales from the Crypt comic book panel transitions, which ruin it. It messes with the pacing and makes the whole thing seem cheesier.
It's also already implicit in the premise. You don't need to make it explicit.
It was just putting a hat on a hat. You didn't need any of that. So like, it bothers me when you can't find the original version, because sometimes the original version is better or arguably better. And even if it's only arguably better, I think it's worth keeping around. So anyway, that's my take on fan edits. It's something you can do, but you're probably not replacing it. You're just engaging in film criticism. Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, so that's it.
That's our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you
very much for listening. Sorry I was a little late this week. We'll try to be...
Stop going out of town for work.
I'm sorry. I got to watch Geostorm and King Arthur, The Legend of the Sword on the plane, so it wasn't all bad.
I saw Carry On Cleo.
I don't think...
Which my very first Carry On film this last week.
Oh.
There's a whole series. Do you know the Carry On movies?
I do. I suspect most of our listeners don't. There was actually this incredibly long franchise of comedies in England that was called Carry On. Most people in America haven't heard of them, in my experience.
And they're all spoof films. They all started out very kind of wry and eventually got way bawdy really quickly. And eventually was just all sex jokes in like the early 60s. It's just as broad and just as crass as I had been led to believe. I enjoyed myself.
King Arthur.
I'll probably watch a couple more Carry On films just to get my education beefed up.
King Arthur: Legend of the Sword wasn't as bad as I had been led to believe, but I don't think I've seen a film with as many montages in it since Man with a Movie Kid. Like, the entire movie is told from one montage to another. It's just a bunch of montages linked up with occasional dialogue. It's super weird.
Did you catch the David Beckham cameo?
No, because I don't actually remember what he looks like. I don't follow sports.
Oh, well, when when Arthur was stepping up to the sword, like he stepped up and there was this like big mean guard saying, "Hey, try or go. Pick up the sword or get your hell out of here." That was David Beckham as the mean guard.
See, I wouldn't recognize like a lot of sports stars. I wouldn't recognize a lot of musicians. I focus on what I focus on.
There are other things in the world.
I know, and that's totally fine. I have an expertise in one of them. So I don't know. I wouldn't recognize a lot of different people. But I recognize you, audience. And thank you for listening. Again, we'll be back next week with a review of some Valentine's Day themed motion picture that will be chosen by a poll on Schmoville, which is available right now. And
as well as 50 Shades Freedman.
50 Shades Freed, a whole bunch of Oscar-nominated short films, 15 total. We'll read some more letters. You can email us, criticallyacclaimedfans@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at William Bibbiani.
I am at Witney Seibold. That's Whitney with no H and Seibold with an EI.
If you want more content from us, we have the Cancel Too Soon podcast, which is available on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever fine podcasts are sold or given away for free. And we review TV shows that lasted only one season or less. This week, it's still Freaky Links, I think is the one.
Still Freaky Links, yeah.
And next week, we're going to be reviewing a failed pilot for a TV series called Steel Justice, which was about a cop who tries to avenge the death of his son using a toy robot dinosaur, which has been possessed by his son's soul, and which occasionally turns into Robosaurus, a life-size robot dinosaur that shoots fire. That was real.
How did that fail?
That was an early 90s live-action primetime pilot. And we're going to review the hell out of it next week on Cancel Too Soon. So be sure to check that out. You can also check us out at patreon.com/Cancel Too Soon for more exclusive content. So thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next week. And never forget, everyone is a critic.
I want to go to the midnight show. I'm sorry, what?